Good morning and a warm welcome to all participants and speakers attending the SAUMA virtual conference brought to you in partnership with InShow Talk. Now, ordinarily, we would all be congregating together in an auditorium, enjoying our coffees and catching up on the year that is. But unfortunately, in these unprecedented times, we have to use the technology that is available to us. And I'm glad to see the number of participants that we have already registered for the day. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names on the chat box. So welcome again, everybody. Lovely to see that you've all registered. We have an impressive lineup of speakers for the day. So I ask you to sit back, grab your coffees, and enjoy. Just some hygiene factors for today. Please, I encourage you to use your Q&A for your questions and your comments. Given that we do have a full lineup, we're going to try our best to get to your questions, but really looking forward to hearing your comments. Please post them, use the Q&A. So I'm going to hand over now to Steve. Steve is the chairman of the SAUMA, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the organization and the developments that have been made in the organization. I now hand over to you, Steve.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, and I too extend a warm welcome to all attending. As the chairman of SAUMA, I have the privilege of introducing our conference to you and presenting it for you today. Before I continue, I am duty-bound to mention the deep effect COVID has had. On behalf of SAUMA and all its members, our sympathies go out to all who have lost loved ones, and our thoughts are with those in the grip of this insidious virus. Let me turn to lighter things. I should like to acknowledge and thank all our sponsors and those who made a contribution via entrance fees in 2019. It is most appreciated. I ask you all to note the names that appear on the digital scroll behind me and during the course of the conference today. I also thank those who have pulled together today's event, especially Christine Sounds from SAUMA and the InShow Talk team with whom we have partnered. I've just been informed with a little smile on my face that we've got some 1,200 people attending online as I speak. This is the largest association institute conference attendance ever in South Africa. And finally, to all our speakers who have taken time out of their busy lives to share their thoughts with you. I thank you for your voluntary time and the time you spent in preparing for today. I respect the effort you have made. It is not always easy, and I applaud you all. This last 18 months, call it, has many, many lessons for us all, but I highlight only two. With the first being the enormous and powerful effect of technology, noting the relatively easy transition I believe most of us have had to work remotely, the attendance of things like conferences globally, and the key thing for me, the ability of meeting people I would not otherwise have had a chance to do. And the second one, and it's a pity I am not facing everybody live, what am I now supposed to wear? When I started working some 25 years ago, or rather for 25 years, I wore a suit, a white shirt and a tie. Then for 10 years it was kind of smart casual. Then there was a 5 years of pretty much casual. And now I've had 18 months of top half okay and bottom half pretty much anything. I know some of you are probably still wearing pajamas as I speak. I see you. So SAUMA for many years has had a really great networking and informative conference. They have always been sought after and were full to capacity. And if by any measure today is an example, we've managed to replicate that again. In 2020 we did not hold a conference, but time has gone by and we have now committed to today's event. Technology once again has been the enabler. We are no longer constrained by 4 walls and 400 seats. So we have changed the dynamics of the SAUMA conference to extend an invite to the UMA market channel, our brokers. It feels so good. It feels so good you're able to attend our first, may I call it, market conference, a SAUMA market conference. I now speak to the brokers in attendance. Those of you who know me will realize I will now take advantage. I do so by telling you that the UMA is good for you and your customer. This means the UMA should be the market of your choice. The theme for those who speak to the insurance elements in today's conference will be emphasizing this point. And by the way, there is absolutely no doubt, lest there is a doubt, only those UMAs who are members of SAUMA are the good guys. But we are mutually under some threat and pressure. I do not give answers today, but hope that it creates a debate beyond the conference timelines today. Some of what I may say could be controversial. Consider the following. Our mutual customer is under massive pressure. They need the very best and independent advice from brokers. They need the quality products and services that the UMAs who are members of SAUMA can offer. So are we really building the tools to do all of this? Where is the technical succession? Are we fitting out risk management capability and advisory services? And are we offering the consumer a fair price, which is sustainable and predictable? Not the cheapest, not the most expensive. Sustainability is the key word. Are we really putting our customer at the heart of a fairly priced deal? Can we do anything about all the costs in the channel between the consumer and the insurer? Where does the cost of capital and solvency fit in? The regulator is going to be talking a bit later in this conference, but legislation is on the move and creating uncertainty. The future activity-based COFI is coming, but current legislation creates cost, points of friction, duplication is rife, and inefficiency between our respective offerings. Think about binder and outsource agreements and why a broker has these tools, very important tools, compared with a UMA. They are for very different reasons. Technology and data are huge game changers. What are we doing about the advancement technology? Are we sharing platforms or building our own? I have a view about building your own. I think it's dangerous. This has an effect on where we work from. And it is all about the collection, management, and interpretation of data. And what about the true disruptors that we have to be aware of, ready to pounce on our market positions? I believe things like binder and outsource fees which affect both of us, will be decimated through automation and how new generation businesses will manage these things. And legislation is going to struggle with respect to the regulator, talking later, as I mentioned, will struggle to be fit for purpose for the future. It is in a catch-up mode right now. Here's a thought for the regulators and maybe for our industry. What about allowing total deregulation of commission? It is ultimately cheaper for the consumer. But today is not all about the worry I've just put on the table. We do have a robust industry. We can be entrepreneurial. We are investing in technology. We are building capacity through data. We are developing products. And most of all, I notice new people are entering our businesses. And diversity, yes, diversity is adding massive value. I hope you enjoyed the next few hours. Thank you so much for your attendance. I appreciate it greatly. From me, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for sharing your pearls of wisdom. You've given us food for thought as we go into our lineup of speakers. Now, to kick us off this morning is a speaker who is no stranger to the SAUMA, having addressed this forum before. Polly van Wyk is an esteemed and Oscar-winning investigative journalist with the Daily Maverick investigations team. Now I'm going to leave her to explain to us about the Oscar-winning Investigative Journalist Award. Leading the charge against uncovering corruption, especially in state-owned entities and private companies. And when she is not knee-deep in investigations, she can be found pounding the streets, most likely with dogs in tow. Polly will take us through what's happening in 2021. I'm now going to hand over to her. Enjoy.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. And thank you to SAUMA for again being willing to test my thoughts and to have me at your conference. It's a great honor. I further greet everyone who logged in the name of the last few hours of Jacob Zuma outside a jail cell. I honestly never thought I'd say these words. So I greet you all in the name of progress, that little progress that we are seeing, and a theme that I will close this session with. And I do hope that everyone sends me a question or a thought, something that you wish to chat about. SAUMA decided that we will answer each of those in writing. So I'm looking forward to your thoughts. Now, as you've heard, about 2 years ago in May 2019, we last spoke to each other at the SAUMA Conference. Now, at the time, I told you a secret because I was about to reveal how the EFF benefited from the VBS money. So it was how Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu and their political aspirations and their private lifestyles were propped up by the VBS money. At the time, I told you about that secret. And in the meantime, I revealed some more truths. And the backlash was that they called me Satan. There were threats of hanging and rape and burning from the EFF supporters. And just quickly, something on the psychology of attacking women. And it's something that, as we're talking about 2021, that is a recurring and a growing theme, especially on social media. And you may, if you're a woman and you're listening to this, you may know exactly what we're talking about. And if you're a male, I really do hope that you're not one of those that attack the woman because it's a faceless forum. So the psychology behind it is, especially like the EFF supporters called me a witch or tried to dehumanize me in many ways, it's easier to perpetuate physical violence against something that is not human. It's easier to believe that something is not worth to be human and then perpetuate physical and online violence against it. Now this year, I can happily say that I didn't cower and that I published another secret of theirs. So I said how Brian Shivambu had signed a secret contract acknowledging that he has received around 4.55 million rand for no good reason, putting that into a contract, but then insisted by his lawyers by adding a confidentiality clause to that contract. Now that was in essence to hide a secret, to hide saying that I have done wrong, and to try and legitimize corruption with a contract, obviously from hiding it from you and from the rest of South Africa. So they can't hide it anymore, and we hope that we can get towards a point where we know why they received the rest of the money and how they're going to pay it back. For many people, that article of mine was proof of what I published all along, about how Shivambu was a conduit and a front of the VBS money flowing to the EFF, to Julius Malema, and to his brother Floyd Shivambu. Now, Malema further just lost a case at the Supreme Court of Appeal, where he tried to sue former EFF MP Thembi Nkosi Khawula for 1 million rand. Now, the court criticized Malema severely for dragging his comrade to court, but not me and Daily Maverick. Now, the reason for that, I can say with no doubt, is that Malema will not survive a discovery process against me and Daily Maverick. It leads me to a theme that I don't have time to discuss properly, but I really do want you to think about it because it's another 2021 and going forward theme that's important to South Africa, which is the one of whistleblowers. And the way we treat these whistleblowers, those people whose shoulders we stand on to find the truth and to shine a spotlight on what's happening. Now, moving on, 2 years from when we last talked, I wrote a series of articles, and I will still be writing on something that seems to have affected everyone that has logged into this conference. I want to focus on that 1.7 billion rand black hole I found in the short-term insurance industry. And it was incidentally also a fallout from the VBS saga. It is the case of Insure and Charles Lee and Diane Burns. And then if they're logged in today, like they did in 2019, hello Diane and Charles. So I received a very sulky lawyer's letter last month from them, from their lawyer, 2 days after I wrote the second article about how they considered serious breaches of various financial laws. In fairness to them, I must also say that they disagree with every word that I publish. They claim that they've done nothing wrong, and that is something for competent courts and the regulator, which we will also get to. It's something for them to decide on. I can only show you what I found and show you how it was stitched together, show you the other side of what you know and why you feel a black hole in your own pocket, and then you have to decide for yourself. But know that they disagree with me. So this lawyer's letter attempted to threat Daily Maverick and me without the real muscle to be serious about it. So the problem is that the FSCA debarred both of them as fit and proper persons based on honesty and integrity considerations. Now, because I wrote about this and what happened, SAICA, the auditor's body, is now also considering reopening their case because Charles is a chartered accountant, of course. Now, Charles and Diane demanded censorship over Daily Maverick. They claimed defamation, and they invoked that old rule of sub judice that's ineffective in South Africa because we don't have a jury. Now, in essence, I see it as a bully tactic, and I see it as an aim to keep information from you and to keep you from being informed. And they don't want me to go on and write about it. They clearly don't know me or the country's media laws very well. And just as an aside, I must immediately offer all Daily Maverick's readers the certainty that we will not be bullied into silence ever. So you'll hear from us on this matter soon. But back to the facts. I revealed how Insure couldn't pay over 1.7 billion rand in premium money to about 45 insurance companies and VBS Mutual Bank, because instead, Insure bought a range of dubious, quite high risk and ultimately loss-making assets with premium money. It was done on the sly, without the consent of insurers, by means of an impermissible scheme you all know as rolling. The goal with that was to make a large profit without the insurers knowing about it. Now, one of these harebrained schemes, just as an example, was a deep water port in Mozambique. It was to be built with the cooperation of China, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Mozambique. So it's very clear that anyone who knows anything about our geopolitics at the moment and 10 years ago, when this project was initiated or at least talked about, the risk of cooperation is extremely high. The chance of this project never getting off the ground is quite good. I mean, just look at how long it took the Kasane Bridge to be built, and now there's still fights about that. And this specific deepwater port is a matter dragging on for more than a decade. Now, despite the common sense around the issue, and probably more because of the fact that it may bring in loads of money, Charles and Diane and Insure dumped a good few £100 million of premium money into this venture. The other assets, a property portfolio and a mine rehabilitation site, wasn't much better or smarter. Now we know that you guys at Hollard and Santam and Guardrisk and Old Mutual had the largest exposure of around a collective 900 million rand to Insure. But the problem is that it's not the large insurers with the backup and the financial muscle that has really been at the bad receiving end of this. It's the small insurers that have taken a severe gut punch. Two of them is closed down, not necessarily because directly of Insure, but definitely as a sort of an add-on. The FSCA found that Cillian and Burns, as I said, that they were the directing minds of the scheme and that they've been debarred then for 5 years based on a lack of honesty and integrity. Now, both have appealed this decision to be heard. It should have been heard in July, in this month, and they've asked now for a postponement. So the review of that case will be heard later. Safe to say, however, and in fairness again to them, that they don't agree with the FSCA or any of my findings. After publishing, several people and companies who has loads of money lost contacted me in secret to tell me their story. And I sense, I must say, a lot of anger and betrayal, not only at Insure and Charles and Diane, but also at the FSCA. And especially the last part is very well deserved. There's always an argument to make that, you know, people shouldn't be scalloped. They shouldn't take money, or they shouldn't do things that is unlawful. But we also need a regulator that has the muscle and the knowledge and the willpower to do the right thing and to ensure that we are all okay. And I see that the FSCA's Lizanne Botha will be speaking later today. And I hope that we can get some clarity on why the FSCA kept watch over a problem for about 2 years before they acted. It's not as if the FSCA didn't know about the situation brewing. Now, one person came out in support of Burns and Salia in private conversations with me, saying that they have done that if they've done something wrong, they would have been in wrist cuffs months ago. Now, I find that as quite a weak argument, seeing that the state of our justice system is in, thanks to our former president. Now, based on that argument, and if we accept that, we have to apply the same to Marcus Jooste and Julius Malema, and also pronounce that they too are completely innocent. So that's why we need a proper NPA, hawks who can investigate very serious, very complicated commercial matters, but also an FSCA, again, that will do their work and that knows their way around schemes that's unlawful and against their own prescriptures. Now, like with Malema and Shivambu 2 years ago, I can reveal a secret today, something that I haven't written about and you cannot talk about, but I'll write and publish about it soon. And it just goes to show how important it is that, again, whistleblowers speak to journalists. People have a moral compass that ensures that they want the right thing to come out. Now, the problem that CN&CO will be sitting with soon is the following. When VBS imploded and CN&CO came to a sudden forced end of their credit line, Salia cooked up a plan. He couldn't pay over the premiums to some insurers, as they should have, but he couldn't tell them why. Now, the reason was that their money was locked up in these harebrained schemes, those illiquid assets we just discussed, that he unlawfully invested in. And the credit line of VBS also dried up without him having the chance to plan for it, because he didn't know, or let me say there's no evidence to show that he did know about the problems of VBS. So what to do then? And this is the kicker. Under oath and in front of an investigations panel into the VBS saga, Charles Salia admitted to have lied to insurers when they asked why their money was late. Let that sink in for a moment. Okay, so what does it mean? When some of you asked Charles Salia why your premium payments were late, he lied about the reason. That is the effect. He didn't have the money to pay over. And the goal of the lie was obviously to placate you. And if he told the truth, the obvious and logical thing for you to do was to withdraw your money and to end your contract with insurer, or at least put them on terms very seriously. He knew that, and so he lied. I have the proof of that, and I will publish it soon. In the meantime, kindly keep the secret. So my last word on Charles Salia and Burns is that the private sector needs to do better. We are sitting in 2021, and over the past 20, 30 years, there was a gradual perception of a weak and inept and corrupt government. Now, only with the Gupta leaks and this CN&CO case and a series of other situations, we did see that the private sector's moral compass is closer to a weather vane. There are clear examples that include Bosasa, Bain & Company, McKinsey, KPMG, and now CN&CO. We are not in the days gone by anymore where you could pay the rugby boxes fees by rolling the premiums. The laws have changed. The feeling and the context in the country has changed to something that's more ethical, along with an international strengthening of anti-corruption, fraud, and private sector laws. We have seen how it turned out very badly for South Africa. And we all, journalists included, must do better if we want to live in a country that we want to prepare for our children. Now, our current president took over effectively in February 2018. 3 years later, I want to share some green shoots with you because there are quite a lot to discuss. I've made quite a list. Now, that list includes at the moment, the BBS people, that 17 has now been accused and before court. Esimagashule is accused and before court. And just standing still on that specific situation quickly is I don't think we can overemphasize how important it is for the ANC to attempt to kick out its Secretary General, having put him on leave in this disciplinary case, and for the NPA to have charged him criminally. It is a seminal point in our history and very important in all the right ways. So SARS has also turned around and is attempting to do better. 3 days after I published how Refilwe Mokoena, the head of legal at the time at SARS, has assisted the Guptas in conducting a VAT scam, Tom Moyane was suspended. I published this in 2018. He was suspended, Refilwe Mokoena was pushed out, and Jonas Makwakwa, that guy you may remember that I wrote about how he injected hundreds of thousands of rand into an ATM, he was also suspended. And SARS is really trying to pull themselves up on their bootstraps, and it seems as though they are doing better now. One thing that I'm particularly proud about is the McKinsey payback recently of over 800 million rand to Eskom. Now, Susan Comrie of Amabungani and I, in 2017, published a 6-part series about McKinsey and how they ensured that they fleeced Eskom and Transnet of around 1.5 billion rand, and how they plan to get more than 10 billion rand from these two state-owned enterprises, as they acted as a Trojan horse for the Guptas and their Gupta companies. Now, we forced them in the end, along with whistleblowers and along with the Zondo Commission and the public pressure, to pay back 1.5 billion rand in total to Eskom and Transnet. It's a good victory for South Africa and we should celebrate it. A very recent situation that I was worried about, the car power ship deal relating to Eskom, was the 200 billion rand that we should have paid or would have paid over 20 years, and in effect locking in our children and their future in a country devoured by debt. Daily Maverick and Amabungani started writing about the car power ship deals and all the red flags that we saw and the big problems there. And the government realized that they couldn't stomach it, that if they wanted to be seen to be doing better, they needed to act. And they just ensured they followed the process, and they ensured that Car Power Ship, the Turkish company, couldn't circumvent our environmental laws, and that deal has been stopped thanks to good whistleblowers and excellent journalists. Now, there are some more. One would be Richard Ndluli, who's also in jail and in front of court these days. I just want to quickly go to some red flags, something that we all should be worried about and keep tabs on. I do think that the unemployment rate in the country is unacceptable. I've been looking at the Second World War and how it's what led up to that situation. Now, please understand that I'm not saying that we're going to war or that we are heading there or that it's a sort of a perfect storm that will lead us to violence. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that we've seen similar situations in the Second World War as we are seeing now in South Africa, where political or politicians are trying to put the judges and the journalists and the public and the NGOs on terms, and to ensure that they're kept under the thumb, perpetuating violence against these people. We're seeing a mass unemployment rate that creates a lot of anger and a lot of feeling that South Africa is not working, even though we have democracy, because there's no economic freedom in the country. And that is a very important point for all of us to consider. Another red flag, I would say, is the infrastructure in our main cities, but mostly in our smaller rural areas. And those of you who live in rural areas and maybe you've traveled to rural areas will know exactly what I'm talking about when we say that the lights and the electricity and the roads and the water is not up to scratch. It's not okay. And with that comes the municipalities and the Auditor General's finding recently that only 27 municipalities in the country has received an unqualified audit. My last word, and there's also a vast list of red flags, but my last word would be on Malema, someone's politics that I really do scrutinize and look at closely. He, as is his way of doing things, he has used politics and his political muscle to bully corporates and government. And the latest is bullying of SAPRA, that has to review every vaccine or COVID vaccine used in our country in order to somehow, in order to ensure that the Sinovac and the Russian Sputnik vaccine is accepted very quickly and for strange reasons in South Africa. That is a massive red flag when a political company, a political party in a country use their political muscle for the financial interests of a foreign country. It's a red flag that I need us all to be very wary of and aware of, and we need to ask questions about it. Closing off on the red flags, I want to answer a question that I know a lot of you guys have. Are we winning the fight against corruption? An honest answer to that, without sugarcoating it, is that we are making progress. Several people are already in orange overalls. Now, the psychology of crime and the perception of the turnaround, however, needs high-profile politicians and business people to go to jail. Ace Magashule, Julius Malema, Floyd Shivambu, Marcus Jooste, President Jacob Zuma, they need to go to jail, including Dudu Myeni as well. That includes the complicated breaches of law, like the case of Charles Alia and Diane Burns, if they deserve it. They don't think so, but that case should be reviewed by a competent court and a competent authority. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate taking the time, and I hope that all of us together can fight and work towards a better South Africa. I wish you well, and I wish you a good weekend. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to hear you speak, Polly. Thank you for a lovely and insightful presentation. We commend your courage and determination and sheer tenacity to eradicate corruption in our country. We are grateful that you are on the side of our insurance industry. So, guys, I see lots of lovely comments coming through. Fantastic. What a phenomenal presentation. Well done, Paulie. Very informative. You deserve a belt. You sure do. Well done. Up next, we have Doug Laban from Lombard Insurance and Tony van Niekerk from Cover Publications, two individuals I'm sure that need no specific introduction. Doug is a qualified engineer and he's currently the head of partnerships at Lombard. Tony, on the other hand, as I've said, requires no introduction. He's a dear ambassador of the insurance industry and has been a witness to the ups and downs that the industry has undergone. Both of these gentlemen are very proficient to address us on UMAs and market relationships. And I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Karen. Yeah, I think I drew the short straw in my slot here. Paulie's going to be a tough act to follow, but Tony and I will give it our best shot.
We certainly will. Thank you very much for that introduction as well. And Doug, thank you very much for the opportunity to roast you in front of a large audience. So yeah, hold on to your seat. It's great to be talking to you again. I think, Doug, maybe just to start off with, to just have you put your money where your mouth is. I will first of all ask you, Lombard is known to partner with UMAs in relation to certain lines of business. So if you can just tell us briefly, why have you built a business around the UMA model?
Sure, Tony. So Lombard's built its business really on a guiding principle of backing like-minded innovators, experts, and entrepreneurs. I mean, this is rooted in how the business was founded back in 1990, where George Lombard was backed by our now major shareholder, Miles Jaffitz, to build a specialist surety insurance business. And that's been the backbone of Lombard's success over many years. Fast forward 16 years from there, we began to diversify into other areas of the insurance markets. And I guess the big strategic question for us was, well, how best or how most effectively do we do this? And simplistically, we and I suppose all other insurers looking to grow their business have three kind of options or potential paths to follow. We can build it ourselves, we can go out and buy it, or we can choose to partner. And against this, I think you need to overlay your company culture, the available skill and talents within the markets, the dynamics of the market you want to target, and then importantly, the capital availability that you have and how that's most effectively utilized or allocated in your environments. So in thinking about those things for ourselves, it was clear that a partnerships approach best suited us. Culturally, we've got a culture that's built around enabling and supporting entrepreneurs. We're also highly relationally driven. So we like to say that we want to grow big by staying small. We want to build a business while nurturing that small business feel. I suppose this can be juxtaposed with a more traditional corporate environment, which is often more orientated towards direct control. And there's no right or wrong here, it's just preference. And I think it's important that you don't try to be something that you're not. So with this in mind, partnering with UMAs was and remains highly attractive for us. From a skills and talent perspective, again, in our view, the best talent often doesn't want to work for someone. They want to work for themselves and are prepared to take that risk. This is particularly important in a market such as ours, where specialist skills and experience can get very concentrated. I guess building your business or your own business is a risk-reward calculation. And we want to build businesses with people who are prepared to have that kind of skin in the game. In our sense, I guess, is particularly in the specialist classes, where the majority of the talent lay in the UMA environments 10, 12, 15 years ago, that's where we needed to focus because we wanted to work with the best talent. This has probably shifted somewhat over the past 10 years, with many prominent UMAs being divisionalized by insurers. But there's no doubt a new generation of innovators will come through. Thinking about the markets, in general, a UMA structure carries an overall, I suppose, a higher overall expense base to a divisional structure. And then the difference, therefore, needs to be made up by better quality underwriting performance. And specialist markets tend to lend themselves to this from a risk selection, pricing, management, claims handling point of view, where they're bigger differentiating factors than the more commoditized part of the market. So the markets we've targeted historically, or particularly in our earlier days, were more specialist in nature, and the UMA structure we felt worked really well. I guess ideally you want to be able to combine that specialist skill with a large enough market to build a reasonable size book, and good examples of that are probably the engineering, marine, PI liability classes, although there are many good other ones. Yeah, and I guess as a kind of rule of thumb for us, the more general and commoditized the products, the less attractive the UMA model is. And this is primarily economically driven. You see this by extension, I think, in the broking environment, where direct insurers offer an increasingly hard to compete against proposition to the market, the more commoditized the product is. But in the specialist environment, yeah, we're still very positive about the UMA approach. And then finally, often boils down to capital. Capital is required to do these things, and particularly in today's regulatory regime, insurers need to be extremely thoughtful in how that capital is allocated. So when comparing a build from scratch or buying a business without a track record together, partnering with the UMA provides a relatively capital efficient alternative and, to our minds, a better risk managed approach. However, at the end of the day, it does boil down to the quality of the underwriting outcome, and the long-term success of any UMA partnership needs to ensure that both the insurer and reinsurer in that relationship hits their return targets on a consistent basis. Otherwise, the reality is the insurer is better off building it themselves.
So, Doug, I mean, over the years, when we look back at the history of the insurance industry, it usually has a long period of stability where nothing really happens, and then there's a spurt of change and growth, etc. How have you found the UMA market, let's say, over the last 10 years, the changes in that area of our industry?
Well, it certainly hasn't been a long period of nothing happening. I would say if we look back at the last 10 years, let's say the market's got a whole lot tougher. But at the same time, you've seen a UMA industry that's up for the challenge. I suppose probably well illustrated by the SAUMA membership numbers, which are down from 80 to 60 over the last 10-year period. And I think a few themes have dominated that. Firstly, the kind of change in regulatory environments. I mean, it's something that Steve touched on. But I would say that the role of the UMA is diminished somewhat, and it's not differentiated at all to any other binder holder in the regulatory regime we have in place. So while much of the regulatory change has been positive, I feel an opportunity has been missed to give the UMA a clearly defined and differentiated space in our market. And that's something I think, certainly from our perspective, we still are keen to see happen. And yeah, I suppose a kind of practical example of this is often UMAs are left competing against broker binder agreements, and they're unable to respond in a way that insurer can. The outcome is an unlevel playing field and a closing off of markets to UMAs. So for me, given the role the UMA plays as representing the insurer, I see no reason why they shouldn't be in a position to compete on a level playing field with insurers. Second theme, again, something Steve mentioned is the dramatic technology change in our industry, and that's not limited to the UMA space by any means. And it's much talked about for very good reason. I really don't think we can underestimate both the change that has taken place and the change to come, and how this change really forces a reevaluation of many of our long-held assumptions about how things can be done. And that goes from policy administration systems to embedding AI in your underwriting process. The future is going to look very different to the past. And a kind of example of this change over the past 10 years is the need for accurate and timeless exchange of granular data between the UMA and the insurer. And I mean, while from a Lombard perspective, we are there now, it's not been out without significant time, efforts, and investments on something that on the face of it seems fairly simple. So in my view, a UMA that's not highly competent at data management, operates from the cloud, proactively embeds technology in their underwriting, claims, risk management processes, and looks to build underwriting differentiation around their technology, in addition to their people, will struggle in the future. I suppose another important theme, particularly with the audience in mind, is our distribution partner change. And fundamentally, as everyone knows, the UMA is completely reliant on intermediaries to represent the client in distributing their offering. And I think this has been a largely successful relationship over many years, but pressure has developed around the proliferation of broker binders, administrators, which, as I mentioned, UMAs don't have a natural fit with, as well as direct insurers continuing to take market share. So all of this creates significant channel pressure, but also opportunity. There's a huge amount of space still for UMAs who can deliver a differentiated offering, which enable brokers to deliver better outcomes to their clients. I think how UMAs deliver this differentiation is critical to both a thriving UMA market as well as a broker market. Skill set change has been significant. I mean, safe to say significant skill has been lost from the industry over the past 10 years. And replacing that skill is a real challenge. I think Steve referred to it as technical succession. And again, this is not limited to the UMA. It's a common challenge for brokers, UMAs, insurers, reinsurers, for the whole industry. And in this challenge, we really have to look to the future, where we see many innovators, experts, and entrepreneurs emerging. people do respond to the challenge, which is really exciting. And I guess the question for them, and then the challenge for us is a UMA structure the best one to fulfill their ambitions? And how we make the UMA environment as attractive as possible for people looking to build great businesses, I think is an industry challenge we need to meet. And then finally, there's been big change in the insurer environment. I mentioned capital a little earlier, but the SAM capital regime makes return hurdles much more difficult to meet. It makes a diversified portfolio ever more important. Scale is more important. There's just a kind of base cost to running a license that you can't manage down beyond a certain point. So this makes it very difficult for smaller, more innovative insurers who historically have been very strong supporters of the UMA model. Other events, as Paulie mentioned, have also contributed to this negatively. And I think her points around it disproportionately impacting smaller insurers is a very important point. At the same time, when you consider the larger insurers, many of them have taken the approach of divisionalizing UMAs. So that makes the market of insurers supporting UMAs much smaller. Also, as we all know, we've come through a long and slow soft cycle from a rating perspective, and this drives a very cost-conscious behavior from insurers. And that expense-based focus creates pressure on a UMA model, which is inherently more expensive than a divisionalized model. And the degree to which insurers and UMAs can partner in removing these frictional costs is critical. And I suppose I'd actually include brokers in this too. We all need to play a part in maintaining a cost-effective distribution channel, which is something the direct guys do very well.
So Doug, I mean, you mentioned that, and this is quite obvious in the market, that the UMAs rely on the broker environment, which means that for the UMA, it's also important that the broker market is healthy and strong. So maybe just to position this a little bit, how do you see the UMA model help the broker, or should help the broker, and then obviously by extension add benefit to the client?
So yeah, I suppose as much as a whole lot has changed, to me the kind of critical points of differentiation remain the same for a UMA and what they want to or should deliver to the market, which competitors such as other insurers will struggle to, or it's just more difficult to. And that's really around responsive service, speed of decision making, that level of agility, the ability to deal with decision makers, personal connection and relationship. I think kind of thoughts around products and solution innovation is critical. How do we deliver really bespoke specialist solutions? And I would say it's not just maybe about the products per se, but it's about the solution, the kind of level of risk management we can offer around what we do. Creates differentiation, which is difficult for bigger insurers to respond to. And then finally is the deep specialist knowledge and customer knowledge. Historically, this has been a key point of differentiation for UMAs and remains so. And this is something which we need to make sure we continue to invest in. So I would say many of these points center around people, relationship, and skill. And these critical threads in our industry will remain. As much as we talk a lot about technology, for me, technology is a means to enabling effective relationship and delivery of skill to our brokers and clients, as opposed to an alternative approach. So if a UMA is able to deliver these things effectively, it should enable the broker to represent and serve clients more effectively from a service, quality of cover, claims handling perspective.
Doug, to come back to something that you said or mentioned a little bit earlier, the regulator has allowed binders and outsource agreements to flourish in the market. Both UMAs and binders use these contracts extensively. So Lombard and other insurers have allowed them, obviously, to do this. Do you think there's a difference between the use of binders and outsource agreements in the hands of brokers versus those in the hands of UMAs per se? And do you think the legislator should recognize this difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a significant difference, and too often people get caught in an either-or type conversation, and they view a binder as a single common thing, which is done by different entities. But for me, a UMA binder is very different to a broker binder, to contrast the two. What differentiates a UMA binder really is the risk skill. As an insurer, I'm outsourcing the management of a profitable, hopefully underwriting portfolio to a group of people. And they have, as we know, skin in the game in the success of that portfolio typically. Whereas the administrative process-related functions, which are often very effectively done by a broker or administrator, are not differentiating points for UMA. Yes, we need to do them very well, and it's important that we do so, but it's difficult to build real competitive advantage around. That's, at the end of the day, how we process policy on a system is entry to the game stuff, and that's whether you're a UMA administrator or broker. So that level of recognition of the underwriting skill and the extent of mandate given by the insurer to a UMA, I think is not well reflected in the regulation as it stands. So from my perspective, the binder regulatory environment needs to reflect these differences. And in doing this, it enables UMAs to compete alongside insurers, for example, on payment of binder and outsource fees, on being able to proactively manage their distribution environment, as opposed to where we currently sit, they've been boxed into a smaller and smaller channel of activity. I suppose, yeah, again, coming back to the underlying points of we often get caught in like this discussion on no duplication and who's getting paid for doing what, and this, if you do this, you get paid this fee. But I think that's missing the point and not looking at how do we compete effectively together against, for example, a direct channel, against an insurtech type play. And until we're solving that problem together, I don't think we're having the right level of conversation around
it. In a recent conversation we had, you spoke about data. You mentioned, apologies to Coleridge, data everywhere, not any useful bite, which I think is quite appropriate for many, but it is a massive issue threatening the future of binders and outsource agreements. Was this about risk management and capital or solvency more than anything else?
So, yeah, from our perspective as an insurer and certainly in how we look at our UMA as well as broker environments, I mean, data and data quality is one of the biggest risks to a healthy binder and outsourced environment or arrangement. There are significant and often ignored frictional costs to overcome. Ongoing quality management efforts are required, and ultimately quality starts at source. An example of the consequences of not getting this right, I think, is that the market will continue to move towards data-driven risk rating and selection. And if you're unable to move with that, you're going to be anti-selected against because your competitors are smarter than you. And I think you see this coming through in some of the direct players and the quality of their results. I mean, if anyone's had a look at the OUTsurance results, it is very impressive. And they've got complete control over their data and use it to drive better and better decision-making every day. And that's the kind of, I suppose, principle we all need to be thinking about and embedding in our businesses. This is a big challenge for the binder channel, which again, we need to meet together, both from an effectiveness and cost perspective. At the end of the day, if an insurer can't get the quality data from its chosen distribution channel, that channel will become less and less viable. Sustainability is critical.
So just on that note, I mean, technology, it's probably one of the biggest drivers of change globally in any industry at the moment, and therefore also the insurance industry. I mean, we've had numerous events and focuses, and we've got more conferences coming up around that. Do you see the UMA model challenged or enabled by all these changes? And do you think the UMA model, especially locally, is able to take advantage of the benefits of technology?
So yeah, it's probably both challenged and enabled. To me, it's a question of attitude. And I would say today the UMA has access to everything insurers and brokers do. And in a software as a services world, world-class technology is no longer the preserve of those with big balance sheets. So the solutions are there. I think what's important to realize is that something I mentioned a little earlier is technology should not be looked at as the hammer to hit all nails. It is not the answer to everything. And it needs to serve and enable better delivery of value, of the value you look to create and strategy you look to execute. Or perhaps another way of looking at it is how can technology and data enable your people to make better decisions and deliver better outcomes to brokers and clients. And my sense is a particular point of difficulty for UMAs is the fact that value has largely been built around individuals with unique underwriting skill sets or experience base, which means they can risk select and price better than their competitors. And this skill set is extremely difficult to replicate, at least that's the assumption. And then along comes data, predictive analytics, machine learning, and it says, well, maybe not. Over time, I think I can do this better than you. And so for specialist classes, where, as I mentioned, I feel UMAs to really thrive, this blend is important. Combining technology with years of underwriting experience where differentiation at scale now lies. So I think the UMAs that get this right will do well. And perhaps a final comment on technology is the importance of giving thought to the changing skill sets and attitudes you need to have within your business. It's as much a kind of people change issue as it is a great technology issue. And it's not something you can outsource, which has often been the strategy of the past. There's real internal business change which needs to take place. And you'll more than likely find huge amounts of resistance to it. This change is really hard, particularly for mature operations. Although I would say the last 15 months of lockdown have been helpful in accelerating this change. I think it's safe to say we're all pleasantly surprised with what is actually possible and what people have been able to do. So the leadership challenge is different. The specialist skills required are different. But if you're aiming to be a leader in your chosen class over the next 5 to 10 years, I really believe you've got to push hard down this path.
I think that brings us to the end of our time. So I want to end off by asking you, I mean, one of the most important things in the insurance industry is the issue of trust, because basically we allow or we expect people to trust us that we will be there in the future when they need us, not right now when they're contracting with us. And this is especially difficult when you're working with an insurer and then a UMA and then a broker, and that trust has to transfer through all those parties down to the client. And each one of the parties have an expectation of the other. Maybe in closing, you can just give us a little bit of your word or your feeling around how we're doing with regards to trust, and if there's any specific recommendations from your side.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with your views around trust. It underpins our industry at the end of the day, and I'd say as an industry, we're not in a great space. We have come off a year of extreme trust erosion through the handling of COVID and our associated obligations. And I mean, I think there are many arguments back and forth, but the reality is the net result is we are less trusted than we were, which is a real pity. Because I don't get that sense that we shouldn't be trusted in the interactions I have with the people I know in the industry, with the businesses we're associated with just the quality of individual, which we probably all have on this call. Like they are good people and people you can trust in our industry. I would, maybe with the UMAs in mind, I suppose, like trust is one thing, but what I really like about the UMA environments is that trust is slightly different, where I'd kind of frame it as personal trust. When you're dealing with a UMA, for the most part, you're dealing with a small group of individuals who have staked their reputations on the promises they make to brokers and clients. And this kind of level of personal skin in the game is often lost at an insurer level, which is a sad reality. And I think so often the success of our industry boils down to the integrity of personal judgment. And when the going gets tough, I think it's very difficult to outperform the commitment to the tasks that a high quality UMA has.
Doug, thank you so much for that. Those comments. I think it's definitely clear that the UMA, the broker, technical skills, the risk management on behalf of the client, all of those things are probably the most important, and the regulation, etc., even though it is a tough environment, should be there to support that. So hopefully we'll get that alignment and it will work that way. But thank you very much for spending this time with me and allowing me to ask you a couple of straightforward questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. And yeah, just to say, as much as there are some challenges, from a Lombard perspective, we're really excited about meeting them and playing a proactive part in continuing to build the UMA environment.
Yep. Thank you very much, Doug. Enjoy your day.
You too. Thanks.
People, relationship, and skill, the backbone of the UMA. But according to Doug, to be a leader in your class, we should start embracing data and technology. Thank you, Doug and Tony, for a riveting discussion. Next up, we have a speaker with an extremely impressive CV. Terry Solomon is the FinPro practice leader at Marsh Specialty. She is an admitted attorney and is a fellow member of the South African Institute of Directors Corporate Governance Forum. Terry also advises extensively on the South African Companies Act and King IV. So she's going to speak to us about contracts. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you and good morning, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here. I'm going to start my slideshow, if it'll work. There we go. Can everybody see that, hopefully? You see that? Good. So again, thank you. I've only got 20 minutes and this is a huge topic to cover, so I'm going to get straight into it. And Doug, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be a little bit controversial in some of your points that you made during your talk. And absolutely, get the people, get the relationship, get everything you've said about partnering and supporting entrepreneurs and the trust element. But as a broker who specializes in professional indemnity insurance and particularly in the broker space and the UMA space, that's not necessarily what we're seeing in practice. So sorry to challenge you. And really the talk today came about when Steve and I were having a discussion around some of the more interesting PI claims that we were seeing, particularly as they affected UMAs and brokers. And, Doug, you talk about trust, but I think gone are the days, Steve and I were certainly saying, where, you can meet at the grill house over a long lunch and negotiate a commercial settlement when things go wrong. Because when the stakes are high, and they've never been higher, unfortunately, that's not necessarily what we're seeing. And what we're seeing in the professional indemnity space is an increase in the number of claims, but also in an increase in the number of claims brought by insurers against UMAs and UMAs against brokers. And what they're doing is that they're using the outsource agreement or the binder agreement to strengthen their claims in an attempt to hold the UMAs and the brokers liable. And I'm going to refer to an example a little bit later on. I think the other thing that Steve and I really came to the conclusion was that the reason for this is really just the macroeconomics that we're seeing, as we all try to navigate our way through this coronanomics and what it's going to mean for the industry going forward. And the bottom line is that we're all under pressure and the cracks are inevitably starting to show. And I'll show you that in an example as well. And in that example, I want to just share with you some of the consequences of dealing with a professional indemnity claim, because there's so many misnomers out there that we have professional indemnity insurance and therefore everything's okay, we're covered. And that really isn't the case, unfortunately, in some of the claims that we're seeing. And finally, just very quickly to end off on some suggestions, really just to highlight our message that as difficult it is in the current economic situation we find ourselves in, difficult it is in the current climate that we find ourselves in, with regulatory, operational, and human challenges, now is definitely not the time for complacency, but really rather one for vigilance. So I guess we can all relate to the boiling pressure pot, and it doesn't matter whether you're a reinsurer, an insurer, a UMA, or a broker. You know, the pot is boiling and it's boiling on full steam. I mean, from a reinsurance perspective, you know, I'm a broker and I just often say it can't get any worse. But unfortunately, if you read, you know, the 2021 outlook for reinsurers from a global perspective, natural catastrophe, social inflation, you know, and higher reinsurance costs, we're going to see higher reinsurance costs into 2022. And globally, the outlook remains negative, which is not great. That, of course, then filters down to our insurers. And we've already heard some of the struggles that they're facing. And McKinsey's, if we can believe what McKinsey says these days, you know, modeling suggests that the South African industry itself is going to contract by up to 15% by 2022. So the bottom line is that insurers, as a result of COVID and the many billions of rands that they're going to have to pay out following these BI claims, they've had to turn their strategies from long-term to really survival mode. And the reality is that they have no patience for uncontrolled risks. So when they are outsourcing arrangements, when they are giving binders, they simply have no patience left if these UMAs are not going to manage their risk at the end of the day. From a UMA and from a financial perspective and from a broker perspective, you know, the financial, operational, and people pressures are just absolutely enormous. I look after a team of 26 people. Half of my team have had COVID. And let's not underestimate the operational impact that that had. You know, some of my team got sick a day before big RFPs were due. Others got sick days before massive renewals were due. And so the impact from an operational perspective was enormous. The impact or the pressure from financial, I mean, Doug, you alluded to it earlier, you know, when you said that underwriting performance is key. That's why you're in business, right? And unfortunately, with the advent of coronanomics and just the sheer pressure that we find ourselves in from a financial perspective, we are starting to see, unfortunately, corners being cut and mandate breaches increasing. And the other thing from just an operational perspective, you know, this whole work from home concept, it does work, but from a management perspective, it's really, really difficult. And so what we are seeing, unfortunately, just the reality is that eye off the ball is happening. We are seeing increased errors and omissions coming through. And whether these are just general E&Os, I had one yesterday of a broker who unfortunately didn't get the no claims declaration in on time for renewal. Of course, as Murphy would have it, a very big claim comes in and the insurer is now going to deny that claim. And so whether it's basic E&Os like that, or as I said earlier, whether it's mandate breaches or cutting corners, we are seeing the number of professional indemnity claims increase. Now, of course, the market for PI has responded equally as a result of that. I have a very good client who always says to me, Terry, don't talk to me in legalese, you know, just give it to me straight. So in talking to him about the PI market and the state of the PI market the other day, I said to him, it's fraught. I think he understood that. And so any of you who have recently been through your professional indemnity renewal will probably agree with what I'm saying, that it's fraught. And if you're a broker, it's probably fraughter or even more fraught, if there's such a word. But the bottom line is that premium increases are the norm, and sometimes very high double-digit increases are the flavor of the day. We've seen increases in deductibles, sometimes doubling or even trebling. We've seen loss of capacity as insurers want to reduce capacity, and as many of them simply don't have market appetite for professional indemnity insurance, particularly in the broker and UMA space. There's a very, very big focus on the quality of underwriting, and some of you would have thought that professional indemnity insurers have become like Sherlock Holmes in just the sheer detail of information that they need when renewing the PI cover. And what we're definitely also seeing is a very conservative approach to paying claims. The bigger the claim, the more conservative the insurer is going to be, as we'll see in the example that I use. And finally, and I think, Doug, you alluded to it earlier, is just this massive focus on risk management and risk mitigation needs to be evidenced to insurers when renewing your PI cover. So if we just turn perhaps to an example to evidence the fact that now is not the time for complacency, but to the contrary, the time for vigilance. This is a very basic example. It is based on an actual claim, but of course I have changed some facts to, of course, manage confidentiality. And I think we need to ask ourselves in this example is, are we moving to the blame and claim culture in South Africa as opposed to, you know, the commercial settlement or the trust factor and meeting at the Grill House? So this is a pretty simple example. We have insurer A, who of course enters into a binder agreement with UMA-B. That UMA has the capacity, amongst other things, to write professional indemnity insurance for architects. And in turn, UMA-B enters into an outsource arrangement or an outsource agreement with broker C to also provide professional indemnity insurance to architects. So what happened in this particular case is that Miss S was employed by broker C. She happened to be employed during lockdown. And as is usual, she's provided with the rating table, the in-scope and out-of-scope risks, what she can and should refer, and the usual delegated authority checklist, if we can call it that. She's not given a full induction because she is employed during lockdown and everybody's running around like crazy, trying to get familiar with this new work from home concept. What she doesn't do is she isn't given a copy of the actual outsource agreement. And so no one told Ms. S that it was a specific term of the agreement in an addendum to that agreement, that there were a certain list of clients that were not to be quoted on in terms of the outsource agreement. And this is because these clients had previously been declined by the UMA. Lo and behold, a couple of months into her role, Ms. S receives a risk from a new client. She binds that risk within mandate for 20 million Rand. And like I say, nobody has told her that this particular client was on that addendum. And in the checklist she was given, there was no mention of this client. The insured subsequently submits a claim down the line. The UMA claims department, also oblivious of the fact that the UMA underwriters had declined the risk because their claims and the underwriting were completely separate, ultimately settles the claim and pays the claim. It's only during the UMA's audit, of course, that it realizes the error that broker C has made and now finds itself in a bit of trouble. In terms of its binder agreement, of course, it has to it has to advise the insurer that there's been this loss. And like I say, the insurer is anything but pleased. So what the insurer does is it tries to sue the UMA for the 20 million Rand and also alleges that it's going to cancel the binder. But what it does is it doesn't just allege breach of mandate. In terms of the binder agreement, what insurer A does is it refers to breach of inter alia, the breach of record provisions in the binder agreement, the indemnity clause whereby the UMA indemnifies the insurer against all losses as a result of any negligence on the UMA part, which is alleged by the insurer. The interesting one is the duty of good faith and to protect the insurer's interests and mitigate their risk. There was a specific clause in the binder agreement. And finally, the breach of delegated authority clause. So you can see that the insurer didn't just rely on a simple breach of mandate claim. They went and they delved very deep into the contract in order to bolster their claim. The UMA, of course, in turn, now wants to sue the broker for breach of the outsourced agreement. And so from a professional indemnity perspective, and I'm not going to debate the legal merits of the claim, and of course you can imagine there are many, but I think from a PI perspective, we need to understand that both the UMA and the broker would have now advised notifications and submitted claims. So both of these claims will need to be defended by the respective PI insurers, and I can assure you that both will incur many millions of rands in defending these matters. The one thing that UMAs and brokers shouldn't do is assume that because they've got PI cover, they are fully covered. Not when it comes to a 20 million Rand claim. The things that they need to look out for is that their wording may be based on pure negligence and not necessarily legal liability. And so if they were not negligent, then they're not liable in terms of the policy wording. And insurers may look to not cover that claim based on that argument. The other thing is that some of these PI policies do not cover breach of mandate. So one needs to be very careful. If you're not covered for breach of mandate, particularly if you've got an outsourced arrangement or a binder agreement, you may not have cover. And the other thing I can absolutely assure you is that the insurers are going to scrutinize your proposal form like Sherlock Holmes, because they're going to see if what you said in your proposal form correlates to the cover that they are giving when they underwrote it. And I can assure you that we've seen it in practice, that a 20 million rand claim is definitely going to get or be met with much conservatism. The other thing is, don't underestimate the time management that dealing with a PI claim takes, particularly the hundreds and hundreds of non-productive hours by management. And that's not also to mention the human stress that it can take, particularly on small brokers and small UMAs who are owner-run. The reputational risk can be material, particularly if the UMA or the broker then subsequently wants to secure further binders or further outsourced arrangement. And the other thing is that it may invite a regulatory audit, which of course is something that could create even more problems. But finally, perhaps I think the most important message to take away is that even if you have a claim, then when it comes to renewing your PI the following year, given the hard market conditions that we're finding ourselves in, it's either going to be really, really difficult to secure cover, or it's actually going to be impossible. And there are many brokers out there that unfortunately can't find cover. And that's just a reality that we're dealing with. So I think in summation, it really is not a time for complacency. It's a time for vigilance. It's difficult. And we understand that operating in this new normal is anything but easy. And I think, Doug, you've alluded to some of the challenges, that UMAs and brokers face. Believe me, I'm one of them. But from a professional indemnity claim perspective, we are seeing a rise in the number of claims. And therefore, I think relating to the use of the contract in particular, I think one must ensure ongoing adherence to the contract, especially paying attention to clauses like any warranties and indemnities, because any warranties and indemnities that you give may very well warrant cancellation of that binder or outsource agreement. Look at the indemnity clauses, because you may well be holding your insurers and your UMAs harmless. Look at the duty of good faith. It really is a thing, and you need to do everything you can to limit the risk to the insurers. And as I said, if you're not doing that, they all have businesses to run, and there has to be consequences. Earlier, Paulie said it so well. She says that the private sector need to do better. And if there are rogue individuals out there, then we as the private sector, from an insurance perspective, need to do better. From a governance perspective, stakeholders are going to expect insurers to hold errant brokers and errant UMAs. They're going to expect to hold them liable. The other thing is, of course, ensure the infrastructure requirements are being met. So it's one thing to agree that your systems, policies, processes, and record keeping and data security is up to date in terms of your agreement, but make sure that it's happening. And I know it's difficult with what we're having to deal with. Ensure regular audits of your binders and your outsource arrangement. That goes without saying, not necessarily annually or quarterly, but maybe even monthly. Ensure robust ongoing training of resources, new and old. Had broker Miss S in broker C been properly trained, and perhaps she'd been given a copy of that outsourced agreement, she would have seen that she wasn't supposed to underwrite a particular risk. And finally, of course, review the PI cover. So again, now is not the time for complacency, rather vigilance. And I think perhaps Stephen Covey said it better when he says the key is not to prioritize your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. Thank you so much. I hope I haven't gone over too much, Karen. I wish you all well, and I really, really hope that you're all safe out there. Thank you.
Terry, that was perfect. Thank you so much. It was lovely to hear the perspective from a broker's view. Now that the industry will contract by 15% by 2020 is a scary, scary phenomenon. And the question, are we entering into a blame and claim culture in SA? Two considerations for us to ponder on as we are joined by our next speaker, Julia Cloakley. Now, Julia joins us from the UK and is the head of operations for the Managing General Agents Association, MGAA. Julia has worked in the insurance industry in many roles for a large part of her career and brings with her extensive knowledge and experience. Julia will be providing us with a view from the London market. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Karen. And thank you indeed to SAUMA for inviting the UK MGAA to speak at your conference. So I'm going to share some slides with you. So I'm Julia Coakley, as Karen said, head of operations at the MGAA. And as Karen also said, I've worked in the industry for over 25 years. I've had experience of underwriting roles and broking roles in the high net worth personal lines arena. So it's really good to have that dual view of the challenges of both insurers and brokers. With MGAs clearly sitting in the middle of those two to form the value chain. Is what I'm going to talk about today, and from a UK perspective and what the association does. So the Managing General Agents Association is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2011 by a group of individuals who saw the need for an association to represent Managing General Agents, to lobby on their behalf, communicate the considerable benefits of their underwriting expertise and entrepreneurial enthusiasm, and to help maintain high standards within the industry. These founding members saw at the time that MGAs were seen as the key force in the insurance market, and the MGAA was born. Some 10 years on, we've evolved into a respected trade association that delivers real value to MGAs, who currently write in excess of 6.4 billion of gross written premium worldwide, and are dedicated to shaping the landscape of delegated underwriting in the UK and Ireland. Our mission is to wholeheartedly represent our members and the UK and Ireland MGA market with expertise, understanding, knowledge, and relevance. So as you'd expect, at the heart of our membership are our MGA members who underwrite wide-reaching product lines, which include standard offerings, but also apply their niche underwriting skills to offer coverage for the likes of distressed business, life products, and even offer to cover for your collection of llamas and everything else in between. Our market practitioners and supplier members are key to providing a rounded offering to our MGA members, as by virtue of these firms signing up to our membership, they clearly demonstrate their desire not only to work with, but to understand the needs and wants of MGAs and to mutually share experience, knowledge, and expertise. So what do? We make it our business to ensure that we closely follow regulatory and compliance developments and proactively engage with relevant industry bodies to both understand newly proposed requirements and lobby where rulings negatively impact our members. We communicate frequently with our members to ensure that they are cited on matters pertaining to their responsibilities as MGAs. We strive to uphold professional standards with learning and development support and encourage application to achieve the nationally recognised Chartered Insurance Underwriting Agent title. Our MGA Assess platform allows our members to access a wide range of learning catalogues, which include modules covering legal, regulatory and compliance, MGA business models, underwriting, claims management, and soft skills. We have a comprehensive schedule of events, which include opportunities to increase knowledge, discuss matters relevant to the challenges of MGAs, and bring together our members in order to facilitate business discussions. So aside from knowledge sharing by our market practitioners and supply members, our strong relationship with regulators and policymakers allow us to extend invitations in order that members can be directly addressed by these firms with their respective updates and future plans. This also clearly provides an opportunity to ask questions directly to the subject matter experts in these fields. So our schedule of events also include our capacity exchange, which brings together MGAs and market practitioners to discuss risk appetite and capacity opportunities. Our Meet the Market event connects brokers with MGAs, giving them the opportunity to make introductions, build relationships and explore business opportunities. MGA market briefings, which we've been able to hold on a weekly basis, sometimes twice weekly, are delivered by our subject matter experts from our supplier memberships, Lloyd's of London, financial institutions and industry bodies, all of which have been successfully held online through the period of the pandemic. The biggest event of the MGAA calendar is our annual conference, held in London and attracting over 700 delegates. Our flagship event, the only one dedicated to MGAs in the UK, bring together exhibitors and attendees from across the profession and aim to increase knowledge and provide networking opportunities for the MGA community. We invite respected leaders to provide our keynote address and senior, knowledgeable sector representatives to take part in our panel discussions and debate during our head-to-head feature. Whilst our annual conference was cancelled last year due to reasons that we all know and understand, plans for our September conference to be held face-to-face are well underway and has been incredibly well supported so far, which has been evidenced by our supplier membership base and market practitioners, securing all of our tables available, which exceed 75. So the governing bodies for the MGAA executive team, our board and committees operate in line with our Articles of Association, and as a not-for-profit organisation, the MGAA and its board of directors and specialist committees focus on shaping the future of delegated underwriting in the UK. Our boards and committees are made up of senior management and executives from a variety of businesses who have a collective interest in the success of the MGAA, all of whom provide their services on a voluntary basis. So why MGAs? Many of our MGA members hold a binding authority with Lloyd's of London, which the MGAA support by ensuring that we are closely connected to the ongoing strategy of Lloyd's Blueprint and their consultation and subsequent proposed changes within their DARE product, which aims to reimagine the operations between Lloyd's and delegated authorities. There are many advantages for an insurer that make working with an MGA an integral part of their business strategy, and the ability to widen distribution channels, diversify their portfolio, and increase their capital efficiency could sum up their strategic aim. For brokers, MGAs offer underwriting specialisms that many general insurers are unable to compete with and hold specialist product and geographic expertise. They're able to underwrite opportunistically and respond in an agile manner to market conditions. This can be reflected in pricing, policy wording, and indeed the line of business itself. Many MGA underwriters are also still accessible to the broker, where a conversation can take place on the risk concerned, which gives both parties the ability to dissect the risk and agree the correct terms and rating. Brokers may also reap the rewards of placing that one unusual risk for a valued and long-standing client, ensuring the full portfolio remains with the broker. Allow a competitor to steal that unusual risk, and the broker becomes vulnerable to the loss of portfolio in its entirety by that said competitor. Distribution via broker channels are a preference for circa 90% of the MGA sector, and it's these distribution channels that are also advantageous for both insurer and broker. The nature of a broker to develop relationships with policyholders directly and in turn identify opportunities for specialist schemes are attractive to MGAs, and whilst MGAs and brokers are both regulated by the FCA, MGAs have little appetite for a retail approach given the regulatory environment, marketing spend, and direct insurer market competition. So how do MGAs work? Whilst an insurance broker acts on behalf of the customer, an MGA is an agent of the insurer and will be accountable for underwriting and quite often claim settlement. So, like a broker, an MGA doesn't retain any capital. Unlike a traditional broker, an MGA is able to bind or underwrite risk using third-party capital. The MGA gains access to capital and fulfills its regulatory requirement by reaching an agreement with one or more insurers that are prepared to delegate their underwriting authority to the MGA. A binding authority agreement will put into place between an MGA and a risk carrier, which specify the authority as being delegated to the MGA, typically in relation to the binding of risks, issuance of policies, operations, control and claims handling. Before entering into this agreement, the carrier will require the submission of a programme business plan to assess whether the programme fits within its risk appetite. Programme financials will also be required by capacity providers to better understand past, present and future programme economics, and in particular premium breakdown and development and loss costs, along with any supporting assumptions. Organisational governance evidence will provide the capacity provider with assurance that the MGA's structure and processes for decision-making, accountability, control and behaviour are managed appropriately. Operational governance will set out how an MGA's objectives are set and achieved, how risk is monitored and addressed, and how performance is optimised. As part of the contractual agreement between carrier and MGA, and given the fiduciary duty imposed on the MGA, profit sharing is a key aspect of the MGA's revenue stream, with capacity providers mostly, if not always, treating this as an important hygiene factor of the relationship between the two businesses. To maintain trust, the MGA has to perform consistently against the projected premium income and profit and loss projections year after year. As all successful MGAs depend on a great and sustainable relationship with the carriers, the biggest challenge, therefore, is having the right people in place. So one of the key success factors for MGAs is the ongoing support of their broker partners within their distribution channel. It pays both the broker and the MGA to form strong partnerships to fulfil their respective obligations to policyholders and capacity providers. However, with the current appetite for larger organisations to consolidate, build units within their groups, or simply expand their own client portfolio and/or product lines, acquisition of smaller independent broker firms are prevalent and may reduce a successful distribution channel for an MGA. One of the biggest challenges in the current climate for MGAs is the ongoing need to find and secure capacity. In a hardening market, which we see today, MGAs are more likely to find their capacity providers reluctant to renew a contract or commence a new agreement when their risk appetite may drop significantly due to the ability to grow their premiums organically. Another real challenge for MGAs today, which does also offer opportunity, is the expectation on management of risk data by capacity providers. Investment must be made into data warehousing and data analysis, which is becoming more key to risk selection and allow forensic pricing. There is a risk that those not adopting this approach may be disadvantaged when looking for investment. Finally, the ever-increasing burden of regulation on MGAs, which subsequently increase costs, with the necessity to thereby increase revenue, is of concern to all sizes of MGAs. The MGAA consistently maintains a watching brief in this arena. As discussed, one of the challenges for MGAs is the rapidly changing tech landscape and expectations of their capacity providers. However, an MGA is a natural outlet for technology solutions, given they are more generally smaller than an insurer and can implement changes more quickly. Programs can be brought to market faster and distribution channels increased. The MGAA are working alongside InsurTech UK to develop an affiliate membership, given the many areas in which there are crossovers between our members and the work of the two associations. So our future strategy is our ongoing commitment to support and represent the MGA community. It's evidenced in our strategy to increase not only our MGA membership base, but our insurer membership, who are ultimately the capacity providers for our MGAs. Whilst London is without doubt a key location for many MGAs, our members reach as far north as Glasgow in Scotland and as far west as Belfast in Northern Ireland. We will continue to work with our members nationally and ensure that they have the opportunity to attend events and participate in networking opportunities regardless of their location. This ties in with our launch of welcoming MGAs to join our membership who are currently based in the Republic of Ireland. We're just reaching the conclusion of our member research project, essential in capturing the needs and wants directly from our membership to ensure that we are focusing on those things we are doing well and delivering those we have yet to achieve. Our member forums will be complemented by an additional forum to offer the opportunity for discussion on technical underwriting matters, the idea of which is fully supported by our market practitioner members. Finally, our MGA Assess platform will be enhanced by additional learning programs to meet members' needs, not only to comply with the FCA's Insurance Distribution Directive, but to ensure we support an excellence in the professionalism and expertise of the MGA sector. So I thank you for your time today. Again, I thank SAUMA for allowing the MGA UK to deliver this presentation and to tell you a little bit about how we work in the UK. So thank you again for listening, and Karen, it's back to you.
Julia, thank you so much. It was lovely to hear from the UK market. Clearly a lot of similarities between our UMAs and your MGAs. And I could definitely look at the parallels between the challenges and opportunities that you present as what was presented by Doug and Tony earlier on. So thank you for sharing that. We are now going to take a 3-minute comfort break. And when we will return, we are going to hear from Africa Czech. I hope you've all enjoyed your comfort break. I'm looking at some of the comments. Well done, SAUMA. Awesome. Really enjoying the speakers. Thank you. They certainly are great speakers today. And now we're going to hear from Kate Wilkinson. Kate is the Chief Deputy Editor at Africa Check. Africa Check is a fact-checking website. Now, I didn't even know that existed. And in 2017, Kate developed a program which taught school children how to decipher fact from fiction on social media. That is rather impressive and so relevant. I hand over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Karen, and hello to everyone today. It is a great pleasure to be speaking to you. And before I get started in my speech, I just want to give you a heads up. We are going to be doing a quiz shortly, and that's going to give us the opportunity to engage with each other and to test our general knowledge or general ignorance about South Africa. So what you're going to see on screen now is something called a QR code. Some of you may be familiar with it. And essentially what you need to do is grab your cell phone, open your camera, and just focus it on the code. Don't take a picture, because what you'll see is a little link will drop down at the top of your screen, and you're going to click on that and just wait as we get to start the quiz. If you're having trouble with that, the other thing you can do is on your phone in your browser, go to menti.com, the URL is on the screen, and enter the code just below, and that will get you sorted for the quiz in just a moment. But I wanted to start today by asking you all a question, and it's a pretty simple one. How much do you know about South Africa? I'm pretty sure you've got the basics down. Let's see, it's 9 provinces, 11 languages, around 58 million people, 27 years of democracy, 3 Rugby World Cups. And how much do you know about South Africa's problems? You think you're probably experts on that too, all South Africans do. Anyone can run off a long list. Let's try again. High crime levels, corruption, struggling education system, shocking poverty levels, inequality, disintegrating service delivery, gender-based violence. You get the point. You see, what we have here are the 2 mental states, the extreme mental states that South Africans swing between. On the one side, we have exceptional South Africa. And on the other side, when we swing that way, we head over to what I like to call, in a technical term, oh my God, we're the worst in the world at absolutely everything. I know South Africa has problems. You know South Africa has problems. But how accurate is our understanding of these problems? And what informs this understanding? Because understanding a problem is the first step in trying to find a solution. And now we're going to do the quiz. So I hope that you've all logged in. Let's have a look. Whoa, we have a lot of people. Look at you all. That's fantastic. Okay, so let's get started. And I promise there's going to be no leaderboard, so you aren't going to be revealed for what you do or don't know. So be brave and answer the questions. So we're going to do our first question now. And you're going to have 2 options. The first question is, do 7 million South African schoolgirls miss school every month because they can't afford sanitary products? So you have a few seconds to answer this, about 10 seconds left on the board, and you can select true or false. And we have the overwhelming majority of you thinking that this answer is true. And I can tell you that this isn't the case. In fact, if we look at the data, we see that in this income bracket, where this is likely to be the case, there are around 2.5 million girls. And so the significant number of these girls who could face this problem is actually significantly lower. So let's go on to the next question and see how you do there. Question number 2. Get your fingers ready. So you're going to have a few options here. What percentage of people working in the informal economy in South Africa are migrants from another country. You've got three options: 20%, 50%, or 70%. 5 seconds left. And here we actually have done incredibly well. The vast majority of you got this question correct. The figure of 70% that you see all the way on the right was actually a number that was shared during the debate on the State of the Nation address this year in Parliament. And like many statistics that we see shared about migration, they are often incredibly exaggerated. Let's have a look at question number 3. And this is something that you may be familiar with. Does receiving the COVID-19 vaccine render your life insurance null and void? And you can see here a picture on screen, which was actually a message that went viral this month on social media, spreading this exact message. 5 seconds left. Answers are in. And yes, you guys did really well. I expected you to. And this was actually a message that went viral that was debunked by the South African Financial Sector Conduct Authority just earlier this month. And it goes to show the role that all sectors of society can play in combating false and misleading information. Our fourth question. Does South Africa rank last globally for the quality of its education system? 2 answers here, true or false. You've got 5 seconds left. And we have a pretty good split here. The majority of you are saying that this is false, but just a few of you thinking that this is the case. And this is something that we're going to dig into a little bit later to interrogate. And then our last question, something which we might be feeling today with the cold weather. In 2020, did South Africa experience its coldest winter in 10 years? Ten seconds left. Let's see what the answer is. Okay, almost a 50-50 split. Quite a few of you thinking that's true, but the answer is false. And we're also going to look at this a little bit later. So let's go back. Okay, so some of you didn't select the right answer there. And if that's the case and you got some questions wrong, I'm going to tell you not to worry. We all have incorrect beliefs about something. And realizing that you're misinformed should be the beginning of a journey to understand why you were wrong and what you can do to change that. And don't be ashamed to think that maybe you're a person who thinks that things are worse than they actually are. Hans Rosling, who you're seeing on screen, was a Swedish physician and academic who died in 2017. You can see his book also on screen, which I really recommend. It's called Factfulness. He was renowned for testing people's general ignorance on serious global issues. And he would do similar quizzes like the one I've done today with audiences all around the world. For example, he would ask audiences between 1997 and 2017, did the proportion of people living in poverty A, almost double, B, remain the same, or C, almost halve? Just think about it yourself for a moment. The correct answer is C. It almost halved over that period, but less than 10% of people around the world could select the right answer. Do you know what else people got wrong? A lot. Less than 20% of people could accurately estimate that 80% of the world's 1-year-olds have been vaccinated against some form of disease. Generally, people think it's much lower. And only 7% of people could accurately select the percentage of girls in low-income countries who finish primary schools. It's 60%, not as low as 20%. But why do we get our facts wrong on important issues? From my experience, there are a few reasons. One of them being that sometimes we are misled by people in powerful positions, those that would want to spin and confuse. So let's go back to the question about whether in 2020, South Africa experienced its coldest winter in 10 years. And let me give you a bit more context. Last year, in an interview on SAFM's Market Update, CEO of Eskom, Andre de Ruyter, claimed the following. South Africa experienced the coldest winter in 10 years, and during those cold snaps, demand exceeded what we had anticipated, even before lockdown began. And he went on to say, so while overall economic activity was lower, the peaks that we experienced because of high demand due to the cold weather were certainly exceeded our expectations and put additional strain on our system. And that, he said, regrettably led to load shedding. I'm sure that if we were all in an auditorium together, I would have seen a few eyes rolling in the audience, because the fact check that we conducted last year revealed that he wasn't correct. You see, that's what the organization that I work for does. And that's the answer to your question, Karen. We're a fact-checking organization. Africa Check verifies if statements made by public figures are supported by the most recent and reliable information. We look at data, scrutinize research, speak to experts, and then we tell you if important public statements are true or false. We have teams in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal doing this important work every single day, working to improve the accuracy and quality of public debate. So back to the claim about the coldest winter in 10 years. With the help of meteorologists from the University of Pretoria and a senior researcher from the South African Weather Service, we reviewed climate data from 2020. And it showed that temperatures during the 2020 winter season, so that's June, July, and August, remained normal to above normal. It wasn't the coldest winter in 10 years. The only place that experienced the coldest temperatures in 10 years was the Northern Cape in August 2020. And when you speak to energy experts, they'll tell you that load shedding is caused by a deterioration in the performance of Eskom's power generation plants and the delayed procurement of independent power producers. They'll also tell you that blaming the weather is a bit like blaming God. Here we can see how accurate information and a correct understanding of a problem, and load shedding is quite a problem, can help us hold powerful people and governments accountable, not just for what they say, but also for what they fail to do. But sometimes we're also to blame for our misperceptions or false understandings of the world. And it can be informed by a negative view of the world, or we can be influenced by media reporting on a topic. A widely held belief in South Africa of this sort is that South Africa has the worst education system in the world. And I was very relieved to see that many of you have not fallen for this. Just this week, Africa Check fact-checked this claim, but with an added qualification that you can see on screen. That was that not only did we have the worst education system in the world, that it was worse than Zimbabwe, worse than North Korea, worse than Venezuela, worse than even the most desolate third world countries. That's quite a statement. And maybe you believe this. Maybe you're sitting there nodding your head saying, yeah, that's right. And maybe it's because it sounds like it could be true. We know our education system is not great. But where could this perception come from? A good bet is a ranking that is released by the World Economic Forum, and you can see it on screen here. And the highlighted part is our position, quite low to the bottom. A couple of years we have been at the bottom. And what it does is it ranks the quality of maths and science education in a number of countries around the world. Except this ranking isn't an assessment of people's abilities. There are no standardized tests, and in fact, no students are tested at all. Rather, the World Economic Forum surveys the opinions of unidentified business leaders in a country to produce this ranking. So at best, this ranking is a reflection of business opinion of the education system. And while that's important, it's not the same as a ranking of education systems. It would be the same as asking the business sector to guess what percentage of our population is HIV positive. They'd probably be wrong, and we know that there are much better ways to accurately measure this. So maybe you're thinking, okay, so what does the data show about our education system? And what we're going to do is look at rigorous cross-national testing, where students actually have to fill out answers and sit down and write an exam. South Africa participates in 3 of these assessments. But as I go through them, I want you to just take note of how many countries I mentioned take part in each of these. Spoiler, it's not every single country in the world. So the first assessment is called Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. And it's an international assessment of the mathematics and science knowledge of grade 4 and 8 pupils in a number of countries. The latest results from 2019 showed that South Africa was 3rd last out of 58 countries. North Korea, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela were not assessed. Next up, we have the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study. This assesses pupils' reading skills at a grade 4 level. Here, South Africa was ranked last out of 50 countries. But again, North Korea, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela were not assessed. And then lastly, we have a bit of a mouthful, the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Educational Quality. It found that South Africa's average student reading score ranked at 10th out of 15 African countries, while its average math score placed at 8th. In both reading and math, South Africa ranked below Zimbabwe, but above Mozambique, Uganda, Lesotho, Namibia, Malawi, and Zambia. So yes, this is not great news. I'm not trying to tell you that. In most assessments, we are middling at best and worst at last. And it's certainly no reason to celebrate, but we're not last in the world. One reason that Hans Rosling, who we spoke about earlier, gives for people believing things are worse than they are is what he calls the negativity instinct. This is when we notice the bad more than the good. In his book, Factfulness, he writes how this instinct is influenced by a number of things, including selective reporting by the media, and the feeling that it's heartless or naive to point out that things aren't as bad as they're made out to be. And maybe you agree. Maybe you're thinking, Kate, it doesn't matter that we're not last in the world, we're still pretty damn low. But Rosling suggests that in this case, you're not thinking, you're feeling. And that's a very normal, understandable human emotion. Even fact checkers like myself have feelings. But it doesn't help us understand our country's problems. In fact, it could actively make us misunderstand and maybe lead us to making poor decisions on really important things. I'm not telling you that we should ignore the real and serious problems that we have in our country. And you and I know we have many. What I am asking you to do is to consider how you view the world. Are you looking at the world through what Rosling calls a fact-based worldview? Or are you looking at it through an overdramatic negative worldview, where we are the worst country in every metric anywhere? I want you to think back about how you would feel if you saw clearly incorrect information being shared about the insurance industry. Maybe think about that viral message claiming that people's life insurance would be null and void if they got the COVID vaccine. Accurate information and a correct understanding is critical for the public, but also for the government, the media, and the business sector. Wrong information doesn't help us. Using a map of Cape Town to navigate the streets of Johannesburg is going to get you lost. Using a weather report from New York is not going to help you pack clothes for a trip to Lagos. And if you're trying to determine what South Africa needs to do to improve our education system, knowing we can look to Zimbabwe and not Mozambique, Uganda, or Zambia is important. So what does this mean for you? An audience of intelligent, educated professionals who maybe just learned that some of the key facts they thought they knew about South Africa turned out to be wrong. First of all, it's not something to be embarrassed about. As Hans Rosling's quizzes showed, smart people around the world are very good at getting important questions very wrong. In fact, he argues that chimpanzees would often get better answers because they would select them at random, whereas we're being misled by our perceptions. I want you to view this revelation that you might not have an accurate view of our country as a positive thing. If in the last 15 minutes you had your beliefs challenged on one topic, imagine all the other things that you could be misinformed on. maybe things are better than you think in some places. Maybe they're worse. Wouldn't it be good to find out? And there are a few simple steps that you can take to start this process. First, think about where you're getting your information from. Are you looking at credible news sources of information, or are you skimming the last viral message that lands in a family WhatsApp group? In this regard, we all need to play a role in supporting good quality journalism in this country so that it can continue. Next, you need to ask yourself a simple but powerful question when you see statistics or numbers being shared about South Africa and how good or bad things are. That question is it true? And your next question should be, how can I find out? Because that's the first step in thinking about our problems and starting on the road to understanding them and solving them. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And if you have any facts or perceptions that you want fact checked, please drop them in a Q&A and I'll see if I can help out. Thanks, Karen.
Kate, that was extremely fascinating and enlightening. I think the message is simple. Check the facts. I'm sure given more time, we could have heard you for way longer. Now, as Tony mentioned earlier on, we're going to hear from the regulator. Lizanne Botha, again, needs no introduction. She is a senior manager in the Regulatory Policy Division of the FSCA. She keeps us honest about our market conduct, and having previously worked at the SAIA, AUMA, and the Alex Forbes Risk Services team, she has a great understanding of the insurance industry and will be talking to us about regulatory developments.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank SAUMA for inviting us. We always welcome engagements like this with the industry. And I hope I can elucidate some of the developments that's heading your way. I'm going to start sharing my presentation. Just a moment there. Let me just... If you can give me a moment. Okay. And apologies for that.
Not a problem.
There we go. I hope it's in slideshow mode. Maybe, Karen, you can just confirm if it's in slideshow mode.
Not yet. If you could please put it in presentation mode.
Let me just see. Yeah. No, sorry.
One of our panelists has suggested that you press F5. There we go.
Can you see the sheet? Okay. Can you see it now?
I can see it now and you're good to go.
Okay, excellent. In the interest of time then, thank you very much, SAUMA, for inviting us. And after the very interesting presentations of the morning, rather less awe-inspiring topic, but relevant nevertheless, I'd like to today give you guys a helicopter view of the expected regulatory developments in the insurance sector coming over the next couple of months to a year. I'm going to touch on 5 topics, specifically when it comes to conduct of business developments in the regulatory framework. Firstly, the proposed amendments to the policyholder protection rules. Linked to that, the proposed amendments to the regulations under the Long and the Short Term Insurance Act. I'm going to touch on the draft conduct standard on self-captives, and then also the draft joint standard on outsourcing, which I think is very relevant to the audience. And then lastly, just briefly on the Conduct of Financial Institutions Bill. So let me start out, being a lawyer, with a huge disclaimer saying that everything that I'm going to tell you about today is still under development. It's still in process of being taken through internal consultation between the regulators, between the PA and the FSCA, and also then our government's processes. So fortunately, you will not be able to hold me against for my word today, but I do hope it gives you a good helicopter view of what is coming your way soon. So just a brief recap of the developments in the insurance regulatory sector over the past, say, 5 or 6 years. Those of you who've been involved in the sector for that time, since 2016, we have been working on amendments to the PPRs and the regulations under the Long and the Short-Term Insurance Act. All of this was intertwined with the developments in 2018 when the Financial Sector Regulation Act took effect, which established the Twin Peaks model of regulation, which then the old FSP was replaced with the FSCA, and the Prudential Authority was established. Shortly thereafter, in the middle of 2018, the Insurance Act came into effect. That set under prudential standards thereunder, and which also specifically related to the conversion of licenses to licenses of all insurers under the Insurance Act. Late in 2018, we published a second set of amendments to the PPRs and the regulations. 2020, I'm sure, is a year that everyone would like to forget, but we were working very hard on further amendments, and hopefully very shortly you will be seeing a third set of amendments to the PPRs and the regulations. So moving on then to the policyholder protection rules. I think this is probably the most, one of the most relevant pieces of legislation that's under development. And what we have done is, I've just set up the purpose of the amendments on the screen there. Like I said, it's been under development for over 2 years. Our supervisors at the FSCA has been very hard at work in measuring the compliance with the new PPRs and with the amendments to the regulations. There's been a couple of thematic reviews, specifically with regards to insurance, including on the long-term side, a review of reinstatement practices. There was a specific looking closer at excess structures on the short-term side. And a lot of the concerns that we're trying to address relates to lack of governance, specifically lack of governance when it comes to product design and insurance, some premium review practices that are of concern, and then also a distinct focus on loyalty benefits. What we were also trying to do through the amendments is to address some instances of regulatory arbitrage, specifically referring to the classes of business under the Insurance Act, and also specifically relating to funeral and risk classes of business. Very relevant to this audience probably as well, is the intention is to expand the application of the PPRs to all commercial lines business. This has been under discussion for a number of years, and I will talk to that a little bit. Then just basic alignments, some fixing of drafting, and some policy proposals that we're giving effect to. So I want to just touch on the extension of the PPRs to commercial lines business. In past versions, the first two drafts amendments that we consulted on, there was a proposal initially to extend the PPRs. So 2004 PPRs did not apply to commercial lines business. It was only to personal lines. Then with the 2017 PPRs, the initial proposal was to extend the application. There was significant pushback from the industry saying that it wasn't appropriate. So it ended up where the current PPRs apply to individuals, personal lines, and then very small SMEs. I think what happened last year with the COVID pandemic, the national lockdown, and some challenges that specifically arose in the insurance sector, has moved us to be more convinced than ever that the TCF principles should apply to commercial lines business. And as you may know, the TCF principles, treating customers fairly principles, are set out in the PPR. So that's the embodiment of the law. And just knowing some of the practices that came to our attention, the strong decision has been taken that the PPRs must apply to both businesses and individuals, because the protections afforded to policyholders in the PPR should be available to commercial lines business as well. I'm going to just going very briefly through the other amendments. There's some fixes, there's some changes following on the expiry of the 2-year conversion process under the Insurance Act. So it's just fixing the interpretation with regards to registered insurance. That's no longer a concept that's necessary to be provided for in law. The rule on the fair treatment of customers, which is a very principle-based rule, has been extended to require specifically policies, procedures, and systems, and also aligned to international best practice. We're looking at, the considerations of the longer-term objectives of policyholders that has to be measured at the same time, and considering the more immediate needs for policyholders. What is probably going to be of interest to you all is the rule on product design and the PPRs are being significantly expanded. This is one of the key areas where we have picked up concerns through our supervisors. It will now, the proposal is that it must require, the insurer must be required to have a board-approved product design framework. There must be appropriate involvement from the compliance function when product is being developed. It will require product testing, which is also aligned to international best practice. Product approval process has now been extended to allow for a product approval committee, but to be very explicit about in which instances there will not be delegation of product approval allowed. So beyond senior manager or product approval committee, delegation of product approval will not be allowed. And then it also caters for some specific product design requirements around loyalty benefits. Moving on then to some of the other salient changes, I'm just going to be very brief on this. The microinsurance funeral product standards, there are some changes, structural changes that are being proposed there, amongst others, to make sure that the product standards applicable to funeral policies apply to all funeral types of policies, not only those written under the funeral class of business in terms of the Insurance Act. On the short-term side, when it comes to determining premiums and excesses, there's some specific requirements that's been built in there as well, flowing from the research and the supervisory report done on excess structures. The advertising rule will be expanded on to require focused requirements for advertising when there are loyalty benefits or no-claim bonuses attached to a policy. Amongst others, that the advertisements must be balanced to the primary benefits. It's not allowed to offer an inducement, and the suitability of the product must be clear. Let me just see. Oh, now my computer has frozen. Okay, fantastic. Then some changes might also be of interest. The disclosure rules being expanded on specifically to require targeted disclosures when it comes to bundled products. So products sold with so-called VAPs or value-added products. We found some opaque pricing and benefit structures when these products are bundled together. And this also aligns with the International Insurance Association principles, that are ICPs, that we subscribe to. There's some expansion on the rule on intermediation and distribution, specifically to give effect to some of the RDR proposals, to address some of the imbalances between the responsibility of product suppliers and intermediaries when it comes to focusing on customer outcomes. The rule on monitoring review is being clarified to make sure that the understanding is what is expected when it comes to product review, both monitoring and review of product performance. Also requires some reporting, more granular reporting to the board and EXCO and the relevant company. EXCO would be board committees. Then premium review, that's only relevant, of course, to the Long-Term Insurance Act, but there's some requirements there. When it comes to reporting by insurers, specifically in the CBRs, there will be some more granular claims management reporting. That's just being given effect through to make sure that the definitions align between what the supervisors require in terms of the conduct of business returns and what is in the law. The concept of a reportable complaint will be removed, which is in line to what has already been communicated to the industry. There's some specific requirements around where there's a termination of a policy, when there's a loyalty benefit attached to the policy that's being proposed. And then in the long-term space, there is a specific rule relating to reinstatement of life risk policies that's going to try and address some of the concerns identified there. So yeah, just to that point, we are hoping to publish the draft amendments for public comment before the end of July for the required 6 weeks consultation period. Yes, and I'd say look out for that. It would be good to get some constructive inputs from the industry. Moving along to the regulations under the Long and Short-Term Insurance Act. Maybe just to mention at this point that in the past, the consultation of these two pieces of legislation took place simultaneously. There has been questions from the industry asking, will we be doing it in following the same process? I think we have done an analysis between what has been proposed in the PPRs and what has been proposed in the regulations. I think the view is that there aren't any significant interlinkages. So from that perspective, we don't think it's necessary that the two pieces of legislation be consulted on at the same time, just for the purpose of the consultation. Also, added complexity is that these processes, the regulations are made by the Minister of Finance, where the PPRs are made by the Commissioner of the FSCA. So the regulations will be consulted on actually by the National Treasury. Just to touch on some of the proposals, we are still the requirements and the regulations will probably be most relevant to some of the RDR proposals that everyone and most people in the audience will be familiar with. Splitting out advice from the services intermediary to allow for advice fee by policyholders, to prohibit commission on lump sum investments, some enhancements to the premium collection framework that has been under development for a number of years, to address some undesirable practices on the conversion of binder functions. So on this point, it's been brought to our supervisors' attention that there's a lot of practices in the industry following the last amendments that capped the binder fees when the intermediary is also authorized for advice. There's been some undesirable practices and they've been cancelling binders and replacing it with outsourced fees. And we often get the comment here, but the FSCA doesn't even know about these practices. What I'd like to say to the industry is don't underestimate the value of competition. We often get competitors running to the FSCA telling us about these practices, and there's a number of investigations underway. But we will also, through the proposed amendments, try and address any gaps in the regulation that allow for these undesirable practices. The general principles on remuneration for binders is also being extended to apply to all outsourcing, and then there will be requirements on equivalence of reward, which is specifically relating to the Long-Term Insurance Act. On premium collection framework, I know there's been quite a bit of questions around this, and those of you who understand the specific part of the business process is that premium collection concerns have been under our attention for a number of years. I know earlier in the day there were discussions around the insure group managers. And as part of what we do in the policy division is we're trying to address gaps in the regulatory framework. So there's a number of proposals. There were 5 proposals in our policy paper from 2019. One of the proposals have been given effect to through legislative vehicle, and the remaining 4 proposals will be transposed into the draft amendments to the regulations. The intention remains still to, in a certain form, give effect to these proposals to address the risks that arises when premium collection functions are outsourced. And the intention is also still to very clearly delineate between the different activities and allow for the right remuneration for the right activities. We are also still considering the appropriate dispensation depending on the risk segment in the market. I mentioned the concerns around binder regulations and some supervisory findings about undesirable business practices. What we've also found is that there's been significant abuse in the market driven by remuneration. We've also found that there's unlevel playing fields now between different intermediaries in the market, and also unintended advice gap because the binder fees are capped for advisors. It seems that everyone now just wants to say, well, we're no longer giving advice so that we can charge whatever we want, which I'm sure a lot of people will agree is not really desirable, and it's also not going to lead to good outcomes for policyholders. All it does is it drives up the cost of insurance. Linked to that, there will also be specific notification requirements to the FSCA, and the binder caps will be extended to all NMIs, regardless of whether they're registered for advice under phase or not. The binder, hopefully everyone that's involved in outsourcing and binder functions know these principles quite well. It's the principles relating to fair remuneration and determining fair remuneration. And the intention is to extend these to be applied to all outsourcing and not only binder functions. On that point, I'll be very swiftly moving over to the draft conduct standard on requirements relating to third-party self-captive insurance business. This has been under development for a number of years. It's a very, very specific part of insurance business. And the regulatory developments have been taken, I think, since 2012. There's been regulatory developments. You will all know, or probably the audience will know, what a typical third-party self-captive insurance structure looks like. There's one insurance license for the self-captive insurer, and then there are a number of self-structures under it that operate like little mini insurers. So what we did is we published a paper also in 2019, trying to set out very clearly what the risks are involved in this business model, what our concerns are, what we've identified, and it ranges a number of matters. What we then did is we consulted, there's been 2 rounds of consultation on a draft conduct standard relating to self-captive business. But I think just seeing the theme of where the regulator's focus is, again, lack of appropriate governance over the business of the insurer, lack of oversight over the business of outsourced partners. This has been a theme, and this has been evidence to cause a lot of concerns. It's caused failures in the past. So there's a very strong focus on appropriate governance and oversight, and the responsibility that must remain with the insurer when it comes to performing these functions. So the self-captive standard, we consulted on, we had a significant amount of engagements with specific role players also that are part of the segment of the market. We're in the process of finalizing the draft standard. I think there was over 120 pages of comments received, and it's a 6-page conduct standard. So we do hope to still submit the draft conduct standard to National Treasury for submission to Parliament. In terms of the consultation process, the conduct standard must lay with Parliament for 30 days while Parliament is sitting. After that, depending on the feedback from the Parliament, we can then either go back to the drawing board, or we can then go ahead and make it effective, subject obviously to the approval of the governance, the FSCA governance process. So we hope to still take that to Parliament before the end of this year. Then moving on staying on the theme of outsourcing, and I've spoken about the risks that we've identified. There are definitely also benefits to outsourcing. I don't think we've ever denied that. And the industry has also elucidated this to us. It can lead to a reduction in cost. It can definitely maximize efficiencies, but the risks, what we are concerned of is the lack of ability of the insurer then to monitor its own compliance if it's a heavily outsourced model, especially where it's outsourced to parties who are not regulated and they're not within the regulatory net. The weakness in the governance frameworks and the oversight over these structures and the business that is done within these structures, and then also the limitations that have shown from internal controls and the monitoring capabilities activity is being performed by another party. So poor conduct of insurers drive these business practices, and it's a domino effect of what happens. You've got the poor practices that drives the outsourcing arrangements. It impacts the safety and soundness of the insurer, and then ultimately it impacts the fair treatment of policyholders. So just on where we are, those of you who've been in the insurance sector for a long time, before the Insurance Act came into effect, there was Directive 159 that set out the outsourcing requirements. When the Insurance Act came into effect, that was basically replaced then by the prudential standard, the GOE5. It's commonly referred to, it's on outsourcing of insurers. But the challenge that we were sitting with is that the PA is the responsible authority for the Insurance Act in terms of law, and therefore the legislative framework, besides for binder functions that sits with us in the regulations, was only within the regulatory scope of the PA. Created a gap where the FSCA had limited ability, had to, through the PA, supervise and mitigate conduct risks. So our mandate is to look at conduct risks. As you know, the PA's mandate is to look at prudential risks, and the view is generally that both of these risks can materialize from heavily outsourced arrangements. So the intention is to expand beyond the GOE5. We do not want to duplicate legislative requirements. So the intention is to then repeal the GOE5 and replace it with this joint standard, and thus giving both the PA and the FSCA the responsibility to assess the compliance with the standard, and then in pursuit of their specific objectives, give effect to that. And yes, the intention is also to publish this draft conduct standard for consultation within the next quarter. There's just some of the points that are being touched on in the joint standard. It describes material functions in an insurer when it comes to outsourcing. There's a certain regulatory prior notification that's going to be required in terms of the conduct standard. It also says what must be in the outsourcing contract. The management and review of the outsourcing arrangements that has to take place within the insurer as the responsible authority. The fact that the board remains responsible, and there has to be a board-approved policy and the relevant procedures to make sure that these outsourcing risks, are specifically monitored by the insurer. Yes, so you can also look out for that. And as I said, it will be repealing the prudential standard. Lastly, I'm just going to touch on this very briefly because, as you may all know, the Conduct of Financial Institutions Bill is under development. This is a National Treasury-led process. It is primary legislation, and Treasury, as the policymaker, is therefore responsible for the COFI bill, as it's commonly referred to. This piece of legislation is intended to replace most of the sectoral laws from a conduct perspective. There are, as you know, there's 12 or 13 pieces of legislation that the FSCA is the responsible authority for, all looking at it from a conduct perspective. And the intention from Treasury and the policy view is that we need to streamline that legislation and basically have one piece of overarching conduct legislation to give effect to our mandate as market conduct regulator. And this is very much informed by National Treasury's market conduct policy approach. It's also intended to strengthen customer protection by establishing this piece of law and then have consistent application. And I do know there's been a lot of criticism on that there's different rules for different institutions. So that's also something that the National Treasury is aiming to achieve through the COFI bill, and then of course give better and more flexible tools for the FSCA to be more proactive, to support competition at the same time, to drive financial inclusion and transformation, which is also very much within our mandate, and then also to support innovation, all while still making sure that the customers are treated fairly. Just on the process there, the status of the bill has been published twice. There's been significant amount of comments on it, obviously, because it's quite a broad, the bill itself has got very broad application. There's governance structures being driven by the National Treasury. There's been significant engagements with the industry, with specific industry players, with other regulators, both financial regulators and non-financial regulators, on the impact of this piece of legislation. Currently, the bill is being redrafted based on the October 2020 comments received and the industry consultation. And I think there's quite a bit of changes that's being affected to the bill, including the licensing schedule. For those of you who don't know, there's a move to activity-based licensing under the GOFI bill. So it will move away from the institutional licensing, saying that I'm licensed for conduct perspective as an insurer, and rather it will say I'm licensed as a product provider, or I'm licensed to do general administration, or I'm licensed to do custody, nominee services. So it's very much going to go to the activity that you're going to be licensed for from a conduct perspective. Just relevant also to this audience probably is we have been looking at binder activities and the interplay of binder activities as we currently know it in the insurance sector with the licensing activities set out in the licensing schedule of the bill. And we are definitely giving focus to that to make sure that the next version of the bill's got very clearly explains where the licensing for binder activities will sit, not sit, in the next version of the bill. And I think that is indeed the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. Back over to Karen.
Azan, thank you so much. Always lovely to hear from you. And thank you for giving us a heads up as to what we can expect for the second half of the year. It looks like it's going to be a rather hectic December. So to participants, plan your resources accordingly. I must say there are some very interesting developments, and I think interesting in the sense that it's good to see that the regulator is responding to the market and the market needs, and it's taking a lot more, I get the sense it's a lot more for partnership view. So thank you for that, Lazan. Right, now talking about impressive CVs, Professor Richard Calland is the current Associate Professor in Law at the University of Cape Town. He's a member of the London Bar, a prominent political analyst and columnist for the Mail and Guardian. And the Prof is going to address us on a rather hot topic question, which says, will Ramaphosa get a second term? I wonder. Off to you, Prof.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's very good to be with you all today. And of course, I thought you were going to say the burning question, will Mr. Zuma go to prison? Which might have trumped my, I thought, rather good question to pose to this audience about whether Cyril Ramaphosa will win a second term. Let me try and deal with both as I go through this next half an hour. I know we're running a bit late, so I'll try and end by about 1:15. Karen, I think you said that would be okay. And I'm going to keep my eye on the chat and on the Q&A function in case there are burning questions from the audience, because I would like to try and respond to things that you're interested in. So I'm going to try and overcome my genetic challenges in that regard and speak, think, and keep an eye on the chat and Q&A at the same time and multitask to respond to your interest as I go through this. So let me share my screen if I can do that. Yeah, here we go. So why am I posing this question about Ramaphosa's second term? Why is that indeed an important question? And many of you may be wondering and thinking, well, the question perhaps should be, does he deserve a second term? Does he deserve our support? And indeed, that would be a very good question. And of course, later this year, in the local government elections, which I hope to touch on later, there will be an opportunity for all of us as voters to go to the polls and to send a message to the government, to the ruling ANC, about our attitude towards their performance. And I've just penned a column in today's Mail and Guardian, my monthly column, which argues that although Cyril Ramaphosa is winning many of the internal political battles that he needs to win within the ANC, he is also, unfortunately, making some big mistakes, particularly in terms of the pandemic. And for those of you who play golf here, the analogy I draw in the column is that last year he had a pretty good first 9, But this year, after the turn, in the second 9, he's been shanking quite a few into the water. And whether it's the vaccination program, the failure to use last year's hard lockdown to build up capacity in the healthcare system to cope with a second or third wave, he and his government, unfortunately, have failed. And then lastly, of course, his dithering in relation to Dr. Zweli Mkhize, the health minister, when it was discovered through some very good journalism by Paulie van Wyk and her colleagues at the Daily Maverick, that in fact, Mr. Mkhize had been bending over backwards to enable some very close confidence of him to win juicy tenders at the heart of government. He's been put on special leave, and the point I make in my column today is for those of us who have suffered during the lockdown and for other people who have lost close members of their family or friends or suffered other loss to their livelihoods as a result of the pandemic, none of those people had the opportunity to go on special leave. And so his failure to deal as president more decisively with his Minister for Health, inconvenient though it was to lose a Minister of Health at such a time in the third wave, he should have been more decisive. And I think it will have caused a loss in trust in the government and in Mr. Ramaphosa himself. And the question is, will that translate into some kind of impact in the local government elections? I'll come back to that if there's time right at the end. So again, why am I asking this question? And why is it important? So my thesis is as follows, and you're welcome to comment back at me. You're welcome to challenge it. You're welcome to say that I'm talking out of my hat. My view is firstly that Mr. Ramaphosa is the best person for the job at the moment, despite the mistakes that have been made, despite his shortcomings. Part of that thesis or that observation is premised on the idea that at the moment, there is no credible scenario that has any other party than the ANC winning power at national level. So if the ANC are going to continue to win elections at national level for the foreseeable future, then in my view, it's imperative that the good guys within the ANC are in the dominant seat, and that therefore the reform agenda that Mr. Ramaphosa has launched both in government and within the ANC, the cleanup agenda, is enabled to move forward. What we don't need is for Mr. Ramaphosa to be unseated as president of the ANC at the end of next year, because next year there's another 5-yearly national elective conference of the ANC in December 2022. And at that point, the ANC will decide if it wants Mr. Ramaphosa to have a second term. The other, I think, really important point to keep in mind here, let me move to my second slide if I can. I'll get to that in a moment. There we go. These are the people I'm going to be talking about as I move through this presentation. What has been unearthed in the Zondo Commission, to pick on Deputy Chief Justice Zondo there in the top left-hand corner as you look at your screen, what has been unearthed there reveals the full extent and the depth of the state capture project. So in 2018, when Cyril Ramaphosa became president, when he ousted Zuma from power and clipped Zuma's wings and finished off his second term and came to power in February 2018, I think the thought there amongst reformers such as Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan, and some of us in the commentariat, I think the overriding thought was, well, put a few of the good guys in at ESCOM, at SAA, at SARS, clean out the bad guys at the top of these state-owned institutions, and the job will be done. Well, what has been unearthed over the last 2-3 years is evidence that the rot ran very, very deep. So therefore, the cleanup operation, the rebuilding of state institutions, the rebuilding of integrity in public life and in government is proving to be a much more difficult task. And it is therefore a 2-term, 10-year project and not a 1-term, 5-year project. And that, I suggest to you, is why we need, as a country, in the absence of any alternative from any other party at the moment, because I believe the ANC will continue to win at national level, certainly in 2024, the next national general election. Because of that, we need Ramaphosa to win a second term so that he can continue and hopefully speed up the job of rebuilding government and rebuilding capacity and ethics and competence in the most important institutions of the state. So that's my starting point. Now, so the other points I wanted to talk about, this is a 2-year run into the National Elective Conference of the ANC at the end of next year. Phase 1, the first 6 months of this year, was all about accountability. Accountability in respect of the Zondo Commission, accountability in respect of Ace Magashule, and you'll see a photograph of him at the bottom center of this slide. And it was essential during the 6-month period that Ramaphosa win some big victories inside the ANC. It was essential for his prospects and therefore for the country, as I've argued, that Magashule would be removed from his position as Secretary General of the ANC by the middle of this year. Why? Because from the middle of this year through to the end of next year is the ANC's electoral campaign season. It's during that 18-month run-up to their elective conference that the factionalism gets more intense. And it's during that period that branches and then provincial structures within the ANC hold their meetings, decide who they're going to support, determine the delegates and the delegations that will go to the national conference at the end of next year. And very importantly, and I don't want to bore you with the detail, but if you're interested in how that process works, you have to understand the ANC's electoral college, which is determined by the number of members of the ANC per branch across each province. And what people like Didi Mabuza, who is of course the deputy president, and his photograph can be found there along with Paul Mashatile, his close political buddy, in the top right-hand corner of the slide in front of you. What Mabuza and Magashule before him were very skillful at doing over the last 20 years was gerrymandering the system, gaming the ANC's own internal electoral system, so that branch numbers in their provinces were greatly inflated, so that the number of delegates per province for their provinces went up and up and up. So what you saw was a switch from the 1990s, where the balance of power in the ANC was held by the Eastern Cape and by Gauteng and KZN. By 2017, Mpumalanga, Northwest, were key provinces in terms of the number of branch delegates. And that's why Mpumalanga, Didi Mabuza himself, was the kingmaker at the 2017 Nasrec ANC conference. Now, the person who is responsible for protecting that internal ANC electoral system and ensuring that the numbers of branch delegates are not the subject of corruption or deceit is the Secretary General of the ANC. He or she is a crucial managing director of those internal processes. And therefore, it was essential for Ramaphosa that Magashule would be removed, have to step aside from his position as Secretary General by the middle of the year. That has happened. Mr. Magashule is yesterday's man. He is finished politically for the time being, certainly for the foreseeable future. And Jesse Duarte, his Deputy Secretary General, will no doubt remain as the acting Secretary General of the ANC until the end of next year. So that is a very important political victory for Cyril. And I think where we're at now as the Paternoster Group is we're saying, well, that means that his chances of continuing for a second term are now gone up to the point of being 75, 80%. In fact, there is a good chance that Ramaphosa will now have a clear run to a second term, that there will be no serious contender next year to contest that election. That too is a very important consideration, because what tends to happen in the contested elections back in 2007 and again in 2012 is that when there is contestation, then, as I say, the factionalism tends to become much more significant. And at that point, of course, that seeps then into government. And that factionalism tends to have a paralyzing effect on government, reducing even more the capacity of government to get things done and to move forward on the policy agenda. So even better if Ramaphosa can not only win a second term next year, but have an uncontested, clear run-up to that National Elected Conference at the end of next year. So let me turn then to Mr. Zuma and Mr. Zondo, their relationship and what happens next. Now, of course, in relation to Mr. Zuma, this has been a rather interesting week, has it not? And indeed, this conference takes place. I was tempted to begin by saying this. This conference takes place at a very interesting moment in South African politics. But the truth is that you could have a conference on any day of any year in this country, and it would be an interesting moment politically. There is always something very significant going on, and the country often feels as if it's heading towards some kind of precipice, politically at least, and sometimes economically as well. And of course, this week there have been these two very important judgments handed down by the Constitutional Court. Acting Chief Justice Sisi Kempepe handed down a really extraordinary, and I would argue absolutely brilliant and eloquent judgment on Tuesday. A judgment that found, not surprisingly, that Mr. Zuma not only had defied the order of the Constitutional Court to requiring him to appear in front of the Zondo Commission, but he had aggravated his committal offence by being so rude about the Constitutional Court and by making so many serious, unfounded accusations about the integrity and honesty of that court. In other words, he'd shown a middle finger to the court system and to the justices of the Constitutional Court in particular. So they had every right, I would argue, to do what they did, which was offer a passionate defense of the Constitution in their judgment. And there we saw once again, and I think this is an important point for all of us who are concerned about this country, its future and its economic prospects, we saw once again the excellence of our judiciary, the independence of South Africa's judiciary, and the strength of the rule of law in the face of considerable political pressures. And of course, Mr. Zuma, whilst we can be extremely angry with the way in which he allowed corruption to gain root during his 9 years in office, and we can rightly ask that he be held to account for his role in state capture and the corruption that flowed from it. We can also, I think, in a strange and curious way, thank him for stress testing our institutions of the judicial system, enabling them to show that they are strong and independent, that they are resilient. And what that means is that we have, in the rule of law and in our judicial system, a really strong comparative competitive advantage over many other economies with whom we compete in the global economy. And so, and I did an interview this morning on Business Day television with Michael Avery, and Warwick Lucas, the analyst, was part of the panel. And we all agreed that for the investment world, one of the #1 priorities is to be confident that the rule of law is strong. Investors need to know that their money will not be stolen. They need to know that the institutions of state are strong, and that if they have to go to court, if they have to litigate about a contract or some such matter, that they will get a fair hearing in court, that the judicial system is not corrupt, and that the judiciary are not prone to bend towards whichever politician happens to be in power. So that's a very significant asset that South Africa has. And of course, there are many problems. And as Kate Wilkinson, and I very much appreciated her presentation earlier about fake news. And in my world of politics, there is probably more fake news than there is real true news. And one has to constantly navigate a path through that. So whilst it's true, there is lots of justifiably difficult news to contend with, challenges the country faces, the fiscal crisis, the unemployment figures, the rising levels of poverty and unemployment. All of that is a very serious challenge. I certainly don't wish to underestimate that. But on the upside, on the other side of the balance sheet, we have some very considerable assets in our institutions and especially in our rule of law. And of course, Mr. Zuma, and this is one of the great ironies of his approach to these issues, he has been a beneficiary of the strength of our rule of law, because for 15 years now, he has used what people call the Stalingrad strategy to avoid being held to account. So he constantly uses the excellence of our legal system in order to avoid being held to account, appealing every decision, taking every point. And indeed, as we speak, he is in the process, I'm told, of launching an application to the Constitutional Court and to the High Court in Pietermaritzburg. He will seek a stay, I believe, of his arrest and his presentation to the police and to the custodial services on Sunday, which is what of course the court ordered he must do. And it's further example of the dishonesty of the man. You know, he's very fond of saying he wants his day of court. He was very keen to point out that if necessary, he would go to prison and martyr himself in the face of this biased, dishonest judicial system. But now when the chips are down, he wants to avoid prison, just like anybody else would want to do. And he's going to do everything he can in his power to, at the 11th hour, try and avoid the prospect of 15 months in prison. So it's going to be a messy few days. It may be that he does get a stay of execution, but the Constitutional Court will once again, I'm confident, say to him, there's no rescission here. There's no going back on our order. We've been very clear-minded. It was a strong majority of 7-2. And the application he will make to the court, it's called an application for rescission. Seems to me at first glance, having only briefly had a chance to look at it this morning, it seems to me that it's not an appropriate remedy he seeks, that rescission as an application is really where the court, you're asking the court to change its mind at the last minute, to reverse its order. And it's really only appropriate where there has been some obvious and egregious mistake on, for example, the facts before the court, and something has come to light which shows the court was either misled or mistaken or simply got it wrong. That's not the case here. You know, Mr. Zuma went out of his way not only to not appear in that matter, to not contest it. He, as I said, put the middle finger up to the court. And now, of course, he will come running to the court, in a sense, begging at the last minute for a reprieve. And I very much doubt that the Constitutional Court will permit that. Meanwhile, down in Nkandla, there will be some sort of modest displays of force. There will be an attempt to create a political furore, an attempt to give him some kind of bargaining power, some kind of leverage, so that when he speaks to the ANC's National Executive Committee this weekend, he's got something to bargain with and negotiate with. He'll try to say, look, do you and does the country need this kind of trouble? Would it not be better to find a political solution, as the ANC is so fond of saying? And of course, it was a political solution back in March 2009 that got us into this mess in the first place, when the National Director of Public Prosecutions dropped the arms deal charges against Zuma at the last minute, shortly before he began his first term as president, and everything else flowed from that. Courts have subsequently overturned that decision, said it was unlawful, said those charges should not have been dropped. And indeed, now he faces those charges, 15 years late, but nonetheless, he is a defendant, as you know, in the criminal case in Pietermaritzburg that will start in a few weeks' time. So that's Mr. Zuma. And lastly, before I stop sharing my slides so that I can actually look at the Q&A and see if there are any particular questions, there is the question of the Zondo Commission and what happens next with that. So in theory, the Zondo Commission was supposed to finish its work 2 days ago on Wednesday. Of course, that hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened because of anything other than Justice Zondo's conscientiousness. As a judge, he is well known for being someone who very thoroughly leaves no stone unturned, and who very thoroughly wants to write his judgments himself and consider every single point and every single phrase and every single point of law before completing his judgment. The problem is he now faces a mountain of evidence, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of testimony, of evidence before him. Happily, last year he was given regulatory authority to appoint some former judges to help him in the task of writing this particular report. And in the next week or two, he will have to recognize that without their help, he is not going to complete the job, and that he will simply have to take the drafts from those former judges. He'll have to make sure he's happy with them. He'll have to stitch it together into one narrative. And in my view, the key thing for the Zondo Commission is well, two things, in fact. Firstly, from the point of view of us, the public, it seems to me it's actually very important that the report, when it is finally published, tells a story. And it's got to be able to be a story that every South African can read and understand, so that they understand what happened during the state capture years, the racketeering that was allowed to happen, the deep structural systemic project of state capture and corruption. And then secondly, it will be very important, and I think in some areas such as Transnet, maybe ESCOM and one or two other things, PRASA, it will be possible for the prosecutorial authorities, if they have the time, capacity, and will, to join the dots. In fact, the dots will be joined in the report. They will simply need to scoop up that evidence and embark on their prosecutions. And a whole large number of prosecutions should flow from the Zondo Commission report. That'll be a very, very important moment. And of course, it will put the president, Ramaphosa, under pressure to act on the recommendations of the report when they come. So let me stop sharing my my slides and see if I can look very quickly at some of the questions. I see one from Gareth Stokes, who said, should the cost of the Zondo Commission not come under scrutiny? Certainly seems there's something of society making obscene profit from the process. Well, I'm afraid to say the people who are benefiting from the Zondo Commission are my own professional colleagues in the legal fraternity. Lawyers are doing extremely well out of the Zondo Commission, that's true. I would argue, however, that even if it costs another billion rand, very, very expensive, it's true, but we need to invest in understanding what went wrong. We will not prevent a repetition in the future if we do not take the trouble to unearth exactly what happened and why, and to identify the shortcomings in our democratic and legal and constitutional and governmental system that allowed Mr. Zuma and his cronies to steal the democratic state in the way that they did. So I appreciate that indeed many will feel it's a high price to pay, but I think it's a necessary price to pay, provided that that report tells a compelling story, and provided that the prosecutorial authorities are able to scoop up the evidence in the way I suggested they could and should, and that serious investigations and arrests flow from that. In other words, accountability in a very real sense, not perhaps in the rather weak form that we saw of the Truth Commission, but in a sense that turns accountability into action in a way that will make people think twice, thrice next time. And therefore, we won't have to go through that again. Dave Gould says, hi, Richard, how long do you think it will take Cyril to rebuild the damage? And are there enough capable people in the ANC to support him? That's a fantastic question. So my blunt answer to you is that the ANC is broken, and that it's broken beyond repair. I do not honestly believe that the ANC can rebuild and recover to be what it once was. What I suspect is that the reformists, the Ramaphosa campaign, will continue to have to struggle for ascendancy. It's never going to become easy for them. There will always be people within the ANC who use the ANC as a vehicle for their own personal enrichment. That is what the ANC has become, sadly, over the last 20 years. I say sadly because when it came to power, it had the capacity to lead society. It had the capacity to act as a sponge at the center of South Africa, this complex, diverse, and often conflictual place. And with its partners in the trade union movement in particular, during the days of the tripartite alliance, I argued then that the ANC was a very helpful stabilizing force within the ANC. But unfortunately, under Mr. Zuma, COSATU was weakened and fractured. The relationship with the ANC was weakened and fractured. And within the ANC itself, we now see levels of division that I believe cannot be overcome for the future. Mr. Scott, Barry Scott says, should we worry about the amount of time our Deputy President spends in Russia? Is our healthcare system so bad? Well, it's an interesting question. No one really knows. It is well known in political circles that Mr. Mabuza has a long-standing chronic illness. He's come close to death on several occasions in the past. Clearly, his view and the view of his medical team is that the treatment that's available in the Russian Federation is better than here. It's a very bad look, though, is it not, when a deputy president of the country leaves to get private healthcare elsewhere at the height of a third wave pandemic, where even people with private medical healthcare, let alone those who are exposed to the public healthcare system, are battling to get the healthcare, battling to get the oxygen and the beds in hospital in Gauteng in particular. So one last question, and perhaps let me just build on that question about Mr. Mabuza. You know, he really is the space to watch for the long term. Magashule was an amateur. Mabuza and Mashatile are the serious people to look at for the future. So if we want to think longer term, beyond next year towards the 10-year period, then it's not so much about people like Magashule, it's much more about who will succeed Ramaphosa either in 2022, next year, unlikely, I've said, or more likely in 2027, and then become president in 2029. So if we're talking about the end of this decade, the space to watch within the ANC is Mabuza and Mashatile. They are an axis, and they are busy slowly, carefully, and with their usual, Mr. Mabuza plays a very long game, slowly creating a new kind of faction, a new kind of Premier League within the ANC that will have the muscle to take on Ramaphosa when the time is ripe, or to take on whoever Mr. Ramaphosa anoints as his kind of reformist successor. The one last question I should take, let me see if I can find one there. Something about Trevor Manuel. I think Mr. Manuel, no, I think his career is probably finished, at least in government. Does the NPA have the wherewithal to prosecute at high level? That's a superb question. And the NPA has strongly recovered in the last 2 or 3 years, but it's been a slow process. And even now, I doubt it has the sufficient prosecutorial capacity or investigative capacity necessary to really cover the ground that's needed. And therefore, what I think is probably needed is some funding, donor funding support to enable the NPA to have a special unit that basically picks up where the Zondo Commission finishes. And indeed, the Zondo Commission has got a team of lawyers, counsel, investigators, and so on there. And really what one needs is for them to be regrouped and sustained for another couple of years. So there we are. I think, Karen, I'm out of time. I see your note that I should only take one more question. And what a pity. There's so many interesting questions coming up at this point, and so many interesting points to talk about politically. And as ever, South Africa is full of contradictions. There are very positive things to say about the rule of law, positive things to say about Mr. Ramaphosa and his rebuilding of government capacity and integrity, but it's an uphill task, the task of Sisyphus pushing a big stone up the hill. So he continues to win many battles politically. The question is, will he win the war? And there are many turns in the road before we can say that. So on that note, let me thank you again for inviting me to speak to you all. I wish you a good day, and I hand back to your mistress of ceremonies, if I can put it like that, Karen Naidu. Over to you, Karen.
Richard, thank you so much. That was Richard, thank you again for a very informative and provocative presentation. You were right. Had we had more time, we could have answered a lot more questions. But unfortunately, we have run out of time. And what we were promised today was a riveting lineup of speakers, and that is exactly what was delivered. I sincerely thank all the speakers, the main event partners, sponsors, and the event host Ensure Talk for ensuring that even in these COVID times, we were still able to have the SAUMA conference that we so dearly anticipate and expect every year. So with that, everybody, all the participants that have joined and registered, and everybody else, have a lovely and safe weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.